Welcome, seekers of destiny, to a tale where ordinary becomes extraordinary, where hidden bloodlines awaken, and where fated love defies ancient laws. Meet Sera Blackthorne, a woman whose quiet life as a small-town librarian is about to shatter the night her dormant werewolf heritage erupts like wildfire through her veins. She believes herself unremarkable, invisible even, cataloging books and tending to her grandmother's herb garden. But some powers refuse to stay buried, and some destinies cannot be denied. Tonight, as thunder rolls across the mountain peaks and ancient magic stirs in her blood, Sera will discover that she is the last heir to a legendary bloodline, one that both werewolf dynasties and their enemies have been hunting for generations. And when Kieran Nightshade, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, catches her scent on the wind and feels the electric pull of recognition, he will risk everything to protect the woman who doesn't yet know she holds the power to reshape their world. Some powers can't stay hidden forever, and some alphas will sacrifice kingdoms to keep their fated mate safe. Chapter 1. The old leather-bound grimoire should have felt like any other book in Sera Blackthorne's hands. Instead, it burned. "Damn it," she hissed, dropping the ancient volume onto the returns cart with a sharp thud that echoed through the empty Millhaven Public Library. The book's worn cover seemed to pulse in the dim fluorescent lighting, its gold-embossed symbols catching the light in ways that made her eyes water. Sera flexed her fingers, staring at the angry red marks across her palms where the book had touched her skin. Third time this week something like this had happened. First, the antique silver letter opener that had left blisters on her thumb. Then the old mirror in the historical section that had cracked the moment she'd tried to clean it. Now this. She glanced around the library's main floor, grateful that closing time meant she was alone with her increasingly strange problems. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked toward 8 p.m., its steady rhythm usually comforting but tonight somehow ominous. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the Cascade Mountains, turning the October sky the color of old bruises. "Get it together, Sera," she murmured to herself, pulling on the cotton work gloves she'd started keeping in her cardigan pocket. "Books don't burn people. You're just overtired." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. The dreams had been getting worse too. Vivid nightmares of running through moonlit forests on 4 legs, of howling at a silver moon, of golden eyes watching her from the shadows. She'd wake up with dirt under her fingernails and pine needles in her dark hair, despite never leaving her second-floor apartment above the antique shop. Sera retrieved the grimoire with her gloved hands, noting how it felt perfectly normal now. Just old leather and parchment, the way a book should feel. She opened it carefully, squinting at the archaic text within. Latin mostly, with strange symbols drawn in faded brown ink that looked suspiciously like dried blood. "Bloodlines of the ancient packs," she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "The Blackthorne legacy and the moon's chosen." Her breath caught. Blackthorne, her surname. Her grandmother's maiden name, which Sera had adopted after her parents died in a car crash when she was 12. Coincidence, surely. Blackthorne wasn't exactly uncommon. She flipped through brittle pages, her pulse quickening as she found a genealogy chart near the back. Names in elegant script, dates going back centuries, and there, impossible but undeniable, her own grandmother's name. Lydia Blackthorne, born 1920, keeper of the Sacred Grove, last of the Moonfire bloodline. What the hell? Sera breathed. The lights flickered overhead. Once, twice, then died completely, plunging the library into darkness save for the strange, silvery glow emanating from the book's pages. Sera's heart hammered against her ribs. The book was glowing. Actually glowing, soft white light pulsing from the text like a heartbeat. And suddenly she could read every word as clearly as if it were printed in modern English, the archaic language translating itself in her mind. The Moonfire bloodline carries the gift of the Ancient Ones. Healing power that can mend flesh and bone, commune with nature's spirits, and channel the moon's own energy. But such gifts come with a price. The last heir will be hunted by those who would steal her power, coveted by those who would bind her to their will, and treasured by the one destined to be her eternal mate. Beware the signs of awakening, burning touch to sacred objects, prophetic dreams, uncontrolled healing, and the ability to sense supernatural creatures before they reveal themselves. When these manifest, the heir's scent will call to her fated alpha across any distance. She will know him by his response to her power, not fear, but recognition. Not desire to control, but instinct to protect. The bond between them will be forged in starlight and sealed in moonfire, unbreakable until death and beyond. Sera slammed the book shut, her hands shaking so badly the gloves slipped off her fingers. The library lights flickered back to life, leaving her blinking in the sudden brightness. "Okay," she said to the empty room, her voice high and strained. "Okay, this is just stress. Too much coffee. Not enough sleep. People don't have magical bloodlines. They don't glow when they touch old books. They don't." The crash of splintering would cut her off. Sera spun toward the library's main entrance, her heart stopping as she saw the front door hanging off its hinges. A massive shape filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that gleamed gold in the fluorescent light. Not quite human eyes. Too bright. Too knowing. The stranger stepped into the library with predatory grace, his nostrils flaring as if he were scenting the air. He was devastatingly handsome in a dangerous way. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. He wore expensive clothes that couldn't quite hide the raw power in his frame, the sense that violence lived just beneath his polished surface. "Sera Blackthorne," he said, and his voice was like aged whiskey poured over gravel, rich and warm and completely mesmerizing. "Finally." "I what? Who are you? How do you know my name?" She backed away from the returns cart, clutching the grimoire to her chest like a shield. His golden gaze dropped to the book, and something fierce and possessive flickered across his features. "My name is Kieran Nightshade, and I've been looking for you for a very long time." He took another step closer, and Sera caught his scent. Pine and leather and something wild that made her pulse race for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. Her skin felt too tight, too warm, energy crackling under the surface like electricity before a storm. "Stay back," she warned, though her voice came out breathier than she'd intended. "I'll call the police." Kieran smiled, and it was all predator. "The police can't help you with what's coming, little moon. Your scent is already spreading on the wind. Every supernatural creature within 100 miles will smell your awakening power by dawn." "My what? I'm not." But even as she tried to deny it, heat was building in her chest, spreading down her arms to her fingertips. The grimoire grew warm against her ribs, as if responding to whatever was happening inside her. "You're a Blackthorne," Kieran said, his voice gentling slightly. "The last of your bloodline. Heir to power that hasn't been seen in this world for over a century. And whether you believe it or not, you're in terrible danger. This is insane. Magic isn't real. Werewolves aren't real. None of this is real." But even as she said it, she could feel the lie. The dreams, the burning books, the way this stranger's presence made every cell in her body come alive. It was all too much to be coincidence. Kieran's expression softened, gold eyes filled with something that looked almost like reverence. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you're scared. But I felt your power call to me from 50 miles away, Sera. Your awakening sent shockwaves through the supernatural world. Every alpha worth his territory is going to be hunting you by morning, and not all of them will have your best interests at heart." A howl echoed across the mountains outside, long and mournful and entirely too close to the library. Then another, from a different direction. A whole chorus of inhuman voices rising to greet the storm. Kieran's jaw tightened, his nostrils flaring again. "They're already here." Sera's knees went weak. "They? Other wolves. Less civilized than me." His gold eyes blazed brighter. "Pack hunters who would rather bind your power than protect it. Who see you as a prize to be claimed rather than a woman to be cherished." Another howl, closer this time. Close enough that Sera could swear she felt it in her bones, awakening something that had been sleeping in her blood for 26 years. "Come with me," Kieran said, extending his hand toward her. "Let me keep you safe while you learn to control what's waking up inside you." Sera stared at his outstretched palm, then at the golden fire in his eyes, then at the grimoire clutched against her chest. Everything logical told her to run, to call for help, to refuse to believe any of this was happening. But the howls were getting closer, and the air around Kieran shimmered with barely contained power that called to something deep in her soul. And when another crash echoed from somewhere near the library's back entrance, the sound of more splintering wood and inhuman snarls, Sera realized she was out of time and options. She reached for Kieran's hand just as the lights went out again, plunging them into darkness. But this time, the glow came from her skin. Chapter 2. The silver light pouring from Sera's skin illuminated the library like captured moonbeams, casting dancing shadows across the walls as her power pulsed with each frantic heartbeat. She stared down at her glowing hands in shock, the grimoire falling forgotten to the floor. "Impossible," she whispered, but Kieran's warm fingers closed around her luminescent palm, and the touch sent electricity racing up her arm. "Not impossible," he murmured, his golden eyes reflecting her light like mirrors. "Inevitable. You're magnificent, Sera." The reverence in his voice made something deep in her chest flutter and warm, but before she could process the sensation, glass exploded inward from the library's tall windows. Dark shapes poured through the openings, men who moved with inhuman speed and grace, their eyes glowing amber in the supernatural light emanating from her body. "Rogue wolves," Kieran snarled, stepping protectively in front of Sera. They couldn't wait for a proper introduction. The largest of the intruders stalked closer, his lip curled in a predatory grin that revealed elongated canine teeth. Well, Kieran Nightshade, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. Fancy finding you here with our little moonbeam." "She's under my protection, Marcus." Kieran's voice dropped to a dangerous growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "Walk away." Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "Your protection? She hasn't accepted your claim yet, has she? I can smell her fear, her confusion. She doesn't even know what she is." His predatory gaze shifted to Sera, making her skin crawl. "But we do. Ancient bloodline. Moonfire power. The kind of mate that could make a pack unstoppable." "Over my dead body," Kieran said quietly, and suddenly the air around him began to shimmer with heat. His human form wavered at the edges, as if something massive and wild was straining to break free. Sera's glow intensified, responding to the supernatural tension filling the room. She could feel power coursing through her veins like liquid starlight, building pressure behind her ribs until she thought she might explode from it. "What's happening to me?" she gasped. "Your power recognizes danger," Kieran said without taking his eyes off the rogues. "It's trying to protect you. Let it flow, Sera. Don't fight it." Marcus took another step forward, and 2 more wolves flanked him, their eyes fixed on her with hungry intensity. "Come with us willingly, little moon, and we'll be gentle. Fight us, and you'll what?" Sera's voice came out stronger than she'd expected, edged with something that didn't sound quite human. The silver light pouring from her skin suddenly flared brighter, and she felt rather than saw every wolf in the room flinch backward. "Threaten me in my own territory? Break into my sanctuary." The words felt foreign on her tongue, as if someone else were speaking through her. Someone ancient and powerful who had no patience for posturing males and their dominance games. Marcus's confident smirk faltered. "Your territory? You're human. Humans don't have." "I'm Blackthorne," Sera interrupted, and this time when she spoke, her voice carried the ring of absolute authority. The grimoire at her feet burst open, its pages flipping of their own accord until they settled on an illustration that made every wolf in the room go perfectly still. It was a woman wreathed in silver fire, standing over the bodies of werewolves while a massive black wolf knelt at her side in submission. The caption beneath read, "Luna Blackthorne, first of the Moonfire line, bane of the unworthy." "Impossible," Marcus breathed. "The Blackthorne line died out a century ago." "Clearly not," Kieran said, and there was fierce pride in his voice as he looked back at Sera. "She's everything the legends promised and more." Sera felt a surge of warmth at his words, but also confusion. "I don't understand any of this. Yesterday I was a librarian. Today I'm apparently some sort of... what? Werewolf royalty. You're the last heir to the most powerful bloodline in supernatural history," Kieran explained, his golden gaze never leaving the rogues who were now backing slowly toward the broken windows. "Your ancestors were known as the Moon's Chosen. Healers, protectors, the bridge between human and wolf. They could channel lunar energy, commune with nature spirits, and their very presence could calm or command any shifter. Or kill them," Marcus added with grudging respect. The Blackthorne women were not to be trifled with. "No," Kieran agreed, his voice carrying a warning. "They weren't, and neither is she." As if to prove his point, Sera's power pulsed again, and this time she felt it reach out beyond her body, connecting with something vast and ancient in the mountain wilderness around them. She could sense every living thing for miles. The trees swaying in the storm wind, the small animals hiding in their burrows, and yes, the wolves. So many wolves, all drawn by her awakening like moths to a flame. "There are more coming," she said, the knowledge flowing through her like instinct. "Dozens of them. from every direction. Kieran cursed under his breath. Your awakening sent out a call that every supernatural in the Pacific Northwest would have felt. We need to get you somewhere safe while you learn to control this. And where exactly would that be? Marcus challenged. Every pack in 5 states will be hunting her now. You can't protect her alone, Nightshade. I don't have to be alone, Kieran replied. My pack will come when I call them. Your pack is 300 miles north. These rogues are here now. Marcus gestured to his companions, and Sera realized with growing alarm that more shapes were moving in the darkness outside the broken windows. Join with us, little moon. Our numbers could keep you safe. Safe? Sera laughed, and the sound carried an edge of power that made every wolf in earshot whimper. You broke into my library, threatened me, and now you want me to trust you? Her glow flared brighter, and suddenly she could see the truth written in Marcus's predatory expression. The hunger, the desire to possess rather than protect, the complete lack of respect for her as anything more than a prize to be claimed. I can see what you really want, she continued, taking a step forward that sent silver light cascading across the floor. And it has nothing to do with keeping me safe. Marcus snarled, his human mask finally slipping completely. Ungrateful little. He lunged forward, claws extending from his fingertips, but Kieran moved faster than Sera's eyes could track. One moment the rogue wolf was airborne. The next he was crashing through the historical fiction section with Kieran's hand around his throat. I warned you, Kieran growled, and his voice was no longer entirely human. She is mine to protect. Yours. Sera's power flared with sudden anger. I'm not anybody's anything. The force of her outburst sent a shockwave through the library that shattered every remaining window and sent books flying from their shelves. Both Kieran and Marcus froze, along with every other wolf within range of her supernatural tantrum. I may not understand what's happening to me, Sera continued, silver fire dancing along her skin. But I understand this. I choose my own path. I decide who to trust. And right now, the only one who's shown me any respect is him. She pointed at Kieran. So here's what's going to happen. You rogues are going to leave. Now. And if I see you anywhere near me again, you'll find out exactly what a Blackthorne woman is capable of when she's truly angry. The power in her voice was undeniable, ancient and absolute. Marcus struggled to his feet, his eyes wide with something between fear and awe, and jerked his head toward the windows. His pack melted back into the darkness without another word. For a moment, the library was silent except for the sound of Sera's labored breathing and the storm wind whistling through the broken glass. Then Kieran straightened, releasing his partial shift, and turned to face her with naked admiration in his golden eyes. That was, he began. Terrifying, Sera supplied, wrapping her arms around herself as the silver glow finally began to fade. Because I have no idea how I did that, and I'm pretty sure I just made some very dangerous enemies. Magnificent, Kieran finished softly. You were absolutely magnificent. And you're right, you did just make enemies, which is why you need to come with me. Tonight, before more arrive. Sera looked around her destroyed library, at the scattered books and broken glass, at the grimoire that still lay open to the illustration of her powerful ancestor. Her quiet, ordinary life was over. She could feel it in her bones, in the residual energy still crackling under her skin. Where? She asked quietly. My territory. The Nightshade pack lands in the northern Cascades. Kieran moved closer, careful not to crowd her, his expression gentle despite the predatory power that clung to him like a second skin. You'll be safe there while you learn to control your gifts. I give you my word. And what exactly does your word mean to someone like me? Kieran's eyes flashed gold. Everything. You're my fated mate, Sera. The bond between us. He paused, seeming to search for words. I felt it the moment I caught your scent. You're the other half of my soul, whether you believe it or not. Sera's breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to call him crazy, but something deep inside her recognized the truth in his words. The pull she felt toward him, the way her power had responded to his presence, the sense of rightness when he'd called her magnificent. It all suddenly made terrible, wonderful sense. This is insane, she whispered. Yes, Kieran agreed. But it's also destiny. And right now, destiny is the only thing standing between you and every supernatural predator on the West Coast. A howl echoed across the mountains again, closer than before, and Sera realized they were out of time for philosophical debates. How do we get there? she asked, scooping up the grimoire and clutching it to her chest. Kieran's smile was pure alpha male satisfaction. We run. Chapter 3. Run. Sera stared at Kieran as if he'd suggested they sprout wings and fly. I'm not exactly built for cross-country marathons, especially not with half the supernatural world apparently hunting me. Kieran's golden eyes gleamed with something between amusement and hunger. You won't be running on 2 legs, little moon. Before she could ask what he meant, he began to change. Sera watched in fascination and terror as his expensive clothes stretched and tore, his body expanding and reshaping itself with sounds like breaking branches and rushing wind. Dark fur rippled across his skin, his face elongated into a muzzle filled with razor-sharp teeth, and his hands became claws that could tear through steel. In moments, where Kieran had stood, a massive black wolf now crouched, easily the size of a small horse, with intelligent golden eyes that held all the warmth and protectiveness of the man. Oh, Sera breathed, her power responding to his transformation with a surge of silver light. Oh my God! The wolf that was Kieran patted closer, lowering his great head to nuzzle against her trembling hand. His fur was softer than silk, warm against her palm, and when he looked up at her with those familiar eyes, she felt the mate bond Kieran had spoken of settle into place like a puzzle piece finding its home. Trust me, his voice whispered in her mind, and she realized with shock that she could hear his thoughts. I'll keep you safe. I can hear you, she whispered. The bond is strengthening. It happens faster during times of danger. His mental voice was tender, reassuring. Can you shift, Sera? Can you feel your wolf? Sera closed her eyes, reaching deep into herself the way she had when confronting the rogues. She could feel something there, wild and free and longing to run beneath the moonlight. But when she tried to grasp it, it slipped away like smoke. I don't think so, she said aloud. I can sense her, but I can't. I don't know how. Kieran's wolf form seemed to nod. It will come. Your bloodline is ancient. Sometimes the abilities manifest differently than in pure-blood wolves. For now, you'll ride with me. Ride with you? Sera's voice squeaked. On your back, like some kind of supernatural motorcycle. A sound that might have been laughter rumbled in the massive wolf's chest. Trust me, he repeated. Another howl split the night, much closer now, followed by answering calls from at least a dozen different directions. Through the broken library windows, Sera could see shapes moving in the darkness. Too many to count, all converging on their location. They're coming, she whispered. Then we go. Now. Kieran moved to her side, lowering himself so she could climb onto his back. Hold tight to my fur and don't let go. And whatever happens, don't look back. Sera clutched the grimoire against her chest with one arm and used the other to grip Kieran's thick fur as she awkwardly mounted his broad back. The moment she settled against him, power flowed between them, her silver moonfire mixing with his alpha strength until she felt like she could take on the world. Ready? Kieran asked. Before she could answer, he launched them both through the library's front door and into the storm-lashed night. The sensation of riding a werewolf in full flight was unlike anything Sera could have imagined. Kieran moved with impossible speed and grace, his powerful muscles bunching and releasing beneath her as he bounded across the town's main street and into the forest beyond. The wind whipped her hair back from her face, and she found herself laughing with exhilaration despite the danger pursuing them. Behind them, the howls grew louder as their pursuers gave chase. Sera risked a glance back and immediately regretted it. Dozens of wolves poured out of Millhaven in their wake, their eyes glowing like coals in the darkness. Don't look, Kieran reminded her, his mental voice strained with exertion. Focus forward. We have a long way to go. They plunged deeper into the Cascade wilderness, following deer trails and stream beds that Kieran seemed to know by heart. The storm overhead provided cover, masking their scent and muffling the sounds of their passage, but Sera could still hear the pack behind them. Relentless, tireless, hungry for her power. How far? She asked, surprised to discover she could project her thoughts to him as easily as hearing his. 50 miles to the border of my territory. Another 20 to the pack house. He leaped over a fallen log that would have blocked a normal wolf, landing with feline grace on the far side. Can you hold on that long? Sera's arms were already aching from gripping his fur, and her thighs burned from maintaining her seat on his broad back. But the alternative was unthinkable. I'll manage. That's my brave mate. The warmth in his mental voice made her chest flutter, and she found herself pressing closer against his neck, breathing in his wild scent of pine and leather and something uniquely him. The mate bond between them pulsed stronger with each mile they covered, and Sera began to understand why Kieran had been so certain of their connection. This felt right in a way that defied logic. Two souls recognizing each other across species and circumstance. They ran for what felt like hours, following a route that took them ever higher into the mountains. The pursuing pack fell back gradually, either losing their trail in the storm or giving up at the edges of claimed territory. By the time they crested a high ridge overlooking a moonlit valley, the only sounds were the wind in the trees and Kieran's labored breathing. "We can rest here," he said, slowing to a walk as they descended toward a small clearing beside a mountain stream. "The border markers begin just ahead. None of the rogues will dare cross into Nightshade lands without a formal challenge." Sera slid down from his back on unsteady legs, her entire body protesting the wild ride. She'd barely touched the ground before Kieran was shifting back to human form, his torn clothes hanging in tatters from his powerful frame. "Are you hurt?" he asked immediately, golden eyes scanning her for injuries. "Just sore," Sera replied, then blushed as she realized she was staring at the expanse of muscled chest visible through his destroyed shirt. Do you need clothes? Because I'm trying very hard to be mature about this situation, but you're very, distracting," Kieran suggested with a grin that was pure predatory male satisfaction. "I was going to say naked," Sera muttered, looking anywhere but at him. Kieran chuckled, the sound rich and warm in the mountain silence. Shifting destroys clothing. It's one of the inconveniences of lycanthrope life. But there are spare clothes cached throughout the territory for exactly this reason. He moved to a large pine tree and pressed his hand against a section of bark that looked identical to the rest. A hidden compartment opened, revealing neatly folded jeans and a flannel shirt. "Werewolf magic?" Sera asked. "Practical planning," Kieran replied, pulling on the clothes with efficient movements. "My pack has been using these mountain routes for generations. We learned long ago to prepare for every contingency." Now that he was dressed, Sera allowed herself to really look at him. Even in ordinary clothes, there was nothing ordinary about Kieran Nightshade. Power clung to him like a visible aura, and the way he moved spoke of barely leashed violence. Yet when he looked at her, his golden eyes held only gentleness. "How do you do that?" she asked. "Do what?" "Switch between that." She gestured toward the direction they'd come from, where he'd been all-lethal alpha male and supernatural predator. "And this?" She indicated his current relaxed posture. "You look almost human right now." "Almost." Kieran raised an eyebrow. Sera flushed. "Your eyes still glow. And you move like you're hunting something even when you're just walking. And there's this sense of..." She searched for the right word. "Power. Like you could level a mountain if you wanted to." "Could you?" Kieran asked quietly. "Level a mountain?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Your power, Sera. I can feel it even now, humming just beneath your skin. The rogues weren't wrong about your potential. A Blackthorne in full command of her abilities could reshape the supernatural world." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "The question is, what will you choose to do with that power?" Sera looked down at her hands, which were beginning to glow again with soft silver light. "I don't even know what I am yet, let alone what I can do." "Then let me teach you," Kieran said. "Let me help you discover everything you're capable of." There was something in his tone that made her look up sharply. "Why? And don't say it's because we're fated mates. There has to be more to it than mystical destiny." Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his golden gaze thoughtful. When he spoke, his voice held a vulnerability that made her chest ache. "Because I've been alone for a very long time, Sera. Alphas aren't meant to rule without a mate. It goes against our fundamental nature. For years, I've held my territory and protected my pack, but there's been an emptiness inside me that nothing could fill." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his warm palm. "The moment I felt your power call to mine, that emptiness disappeared. You complete me in ways I didn't even know I was broken." Sera's breath caught at the raw honesty in his words. The mate bond between them pulsed with his sincerity, and she could feel the truth of what he said echoing through their connection. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "But you don't have to be scared alone anymore." A howl echoed across the valley below them, different from the ones they'd been fleeing. This one was answered by several others, creating a complex harmony that spoke of pack communication rather than hunting calls. Kieran's head lifted, his expression shifting to alpha alertness. My wolves. They felt you cross the border. Is that good or bad? Good, Kieran assured her. They're coming to escort us home. You're about to meet your new pack, Little Moon. As if summoned by his words, 3 massive wolves emerged from the forest around them. They were smaller than Kieran, but still impressively large, their coats ranging from silver gray to russet brown. All 3 approached with careful respect, their heads lowered in submission to their alpha. Brothers, Kieran's mental voice included Sera in the communication, and she realized with wonder that she could hear all of them. Meet Sera Blackthorne, my fated mate, and the last heir of the Moonfire bloodline. The largest of the 3 wolves, a magnificent silver-gray male, shifted to human form. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes, wearing clothes that suggested he'd shifted specifically to meet them rather than running patrol. My lady, he said formally, inclining his head to Sera. I am Grayson, beta of the Nightshade pack. Welcome to our territory. Thank you, Sera replied, then felt foolish. What was the proper etiquette for meeting werewolves? Grayson is my second in command, Kieran explained. He'll help coordinate your protection while you're learning to control your abilities. Protection from what exactly? Sera asked. Those rogues said every pack would be hunting me, but surely not all werewolves are. She trailed off as she saw the grim expression on both men's faces. Not all, Grayson agreed carefully. But enough. A mate with your power and bloodline. There are many who would see you as a prize to be won rather than a person to be protected. And then there are those who would see you as a threat to be eliminated, Kieran added darkly. A threat? But I'm not. I don't even know how to control what I can do. Which is exactly what makes you dangerous to some, Grayson said. Uncontrolled power of your magnitude could accidentally destroy territories, devastate pack structures, or upset the balance we've maintained with the human world for centuries. Sera felt the blood drain from her face. I could hurt people without meaning to. Not if I train you properly, Kieran said firmly. Not if you learn to channel your gifts constructively rather than reactively. And if I can't, the question came out smaller than she'd intended. Kieran and Grayson exchanged a look that made Sera's stomach clench with dread. Then we have a very big problem, Grayson said quietly. The silver light under Sera's skin pulsed brighter, responding to her rising panic, and she felt her power reaching out again. Seeking, testing, connecting with the life force of everything around them. The trees swayed without wind. Small animals emerged from their hiding places to stare at her with unnatural calm, and both werewolves took an involuntary step backward. It's starting again, she whispered, fear making her voice shake. I can feel it building, but I don't know how to stop it. Don't try to stop it, Kieran said, moving closer despite the obvious effort it took to resist the compulsion her power was broadcasting. Try to direct it. Channel it into something constructive. I don't know how. Yes, you do. His voice was steady, confident, utterly assured. Your bloodline has carried this power for generations. The knowledge is there, buried in your instincts. Trust yourself, Sera. The power crested inside her like a wave, and suddenly she wasn't Sera the librarian anymore. She was Moonfire and Starlight, ancient wisdom and primal strength. She could feel every living thing for miles. Not just sense them, but understand them, commune with them, heal them. An injured deer emerged from the underbrush, limping on a leg that had been caught in a trap. Without conscious thought, Sera extended her hand toward the animal, and silver light flowed from her fingers to envelope its wounded limb. The deer stood perfectly still as Moonfire knitted bone and flesh back together, then bounded away into the forest with renewed vitality. Incredible, Grayson breathed, but Sera barely heard him. Her power was still flowing, still seeking outlets, and she could feel it reaching toward the werewolves around her. Not to harm them, but to connect with them. To understand their pack bonds, their loyalty structures, their shared strength. Sera, Kieran's voice held a warning. Be careful. Pack bonds are sacred. Too late. Her power washed over all 3 wolves, and suddenly she could feel everything they felt. Grayson's fierce loyalty to his alpha, the other wolves' protective instincts toward their territory, and most overwhelming of all, Kieran's absolute devotion to her. The intensity of his emotions hit her like a physical blow. Love, possessiveness, protective fury, and underneath it all, a bone-deep need to claim her as his in every way possible. The mate bond between them blazed to life with new intensity, and Sera gasped as she felt her power respond by wrapping around him like silver chains. "What did I just do?" she whispered. Kieran's eyes had gone completely gold, his pupils dilated with something that looked like ecstasy. "You claimed me," he said, his voice rough with desire and wonder. "Completely. Irrevocably. The way only a true Luna can claim her alpha." The other wolves had dropped to their knees, heads bowed in submission to the power she'd just displayed. And Sera realized with growing alarm that she could feel their pack bonds now, could influence their thoughts and emotions if she chose to. "I need to learn control," she said, panic rising in her voice. "Before I accidentally hurt someone or claim the entire pack," Kieran suggested, though he didn't sound unhappy about the prospect. "This isn't a joke." Sera's power flared with her distress, and every wolf within a mile howled in response. "No," Kieran agreed, his expression growing serious. "It's not, which is why we need to get you to the pack house immediately. My grandmother is there. She's our pack historian, and the only one still alive who remembers the old stories about the Blackthorne bloodline. If anyone can help you learn control, it's her. And if she can't," Kieran's jaw tightened, "then we figure it out together. But I won't let you face this alone, Sera. Not ever again." The certainty in his voice, backed by the mate bond she could now feel in vivid detail, should have been reassuring. Instead, it terrified her, because she could sense the other pack bonds now too, radiating out from their position like a vast network of loyalty and obligation. And at the center of it all was her, a woman who'd been a librarian yesterday and was apparently destined to be a Luna today, whether she wanted the responsibility or not. "I'm not ready for this," she whispered. "None of us ever are," Kieran replied. "But ready or not, your power has awakened. The supernatural world knows you exist. And there's no going back to the life you had before." As if to punctuate his words, a howl rose from the valley below, different from the pack calls, filled with challenge and menace. Several others answered it, creating a discordant harmony that spoke of territories being violated and boundaries being tested. "The other packs," Grayson said grimly. "They're testing our borders. News of her awakening has already spread." Kieran cursed under his breath. "How many?" "At least 3 different groups. Maybe more." Grayson's expression was grim. "They're not rogues this time. These are organized packs with territorial claims." "What does that mean?" Sera asked, though she was afraid she already knew. "It means the real hunt is just beginning," Kieran said. "And we're about to find out just how many enemies a Blackthorne can make in one night." Chapter 4. The Nightshade pack house rose from the mountain wilderness like something out of a fairy tale. If fairy tales included reinforced steel doors, bulletproof windows, and defensive positions carved into the surrounding cliffs, the massive log structure sprawled across a natural clearing, its multiple levels and wings suggesting it housed far more than a typical family. "It's beautiful," Sera breathed as they approached, her power humming in response to the ancient magic woven into the very foundation stones. "It's also a fortress," Kieran said grimly, "built by my great-grandfather during the werewolf wars of the 1940s. Every inch of this place is designed to withstand siege." "Werewolf wars?" Sera's voice squeaked slightly. "A story for another time," Kieran replied, but his expression suggested it hadn't been a pleasant period in supernatural history. As they drew closer, Sera could see pack members emerging from the house and surrounding forest. All were in human form, but she could feel their wolves just beneath the surface, alert, protective, ready to defend their territory. The moment they caught sight of her, a ripple of reaction passed through the assembled werewolves. Some dropped to one knee in instinctive submission. Others took protective stances around their alpha, and a few backed away with expressions of barely contained awe. "They can all sense what I am," Sera realized. "Your power signature is distinctive," Grayson confirmed diplomatically. "A Blackthorne bloodline hasn't been felt in these mountains for over a century. It's overwhelming for some of the younger wolves." "Overwhelming how?" "Like standing next to a bonfire," Kieran said. "Beautiful, warm, life-giving, but capable of burning down the entire forest if not properly contained." Before Sera could respond to that alarming comparison, the pack house's front door opened, and an elderly woman stepped onto the wide porch. She moved with the careful precision of advanced age, but her spine was straight and her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her pale blue eyes. "Kieran," she said, and her voice carried absolute authority despite her apparent frailty. Bring her inside. Now. The wards around this place won't hold forever against what's gathering out there. Grandmother, Kieran replied with obvious affection and respect. This is Sera Blackthorne. Sera, meet Elena Nightshade, our pack matriarch and historian. Elena's penetrating gaze fixed on Sera with an intensity that made her want to squirm. Blackthorne, the elderly woman repeated slowly. Yes, I can see it now. You have your great-grandmother's eyes. You knew my great-grandmother? I knew her reputation, Elena corrected. Luna Blackthorne was legendary even in my mother's time. Come, child. We have much to discuss and very little time to do it. They followed Elena into the pack house, and Sera gasped at the interior. The main hall soared 3 stories high, with massive timber beams supporting a vaulted ceiling decorated with carved wolves and lunar symbols. Tapestries depicting werewolf history hung from the walls, and an enormous fireplace dominated one end of the room, its hearth large enough to roast an entire deer. But what caught Sera's attention most were the books. Thousands of them, filling floor-to-ceiling shelves that lined every available wall space. The collection rivaled anything she'd seen in major libraries, and she could sense the age and power radiating from many of the volumes. You're a librarian, Elena observed, watching Sera's reaction. Good. You'll appreciate the value of proper research. This is incredible, Sera said, moving toward the nearest shelf. Some of these books are ancient. How do you preserve them in this climate? Magic, Elena said simply. The same protective spells that ward this house also protect our archives. Knowledge is power, child, and power must be safeguarded. A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Through the tall windows, Sera could see more pack members arriving. Some on foot, others shifting from wolf to human form as they entered the clearing. All looked grim, and several bore wounds that spoke of recent conflict. Report, Kieran ordered, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of an alpha. 3 separate packs have crossed into our territory, Grayson said, appearing in the doorway. The Silvermoon Coalition from the east, the Ironwood Pack from the south, and a group of rogues led by Marcus from the west. They're not attacking yet, but they're testing our defenses. Numbers. Kieran's jaw was tight with controlled fury. 30 from Silvermoon, maybe 20 from Ironwood. The rogues are harder to count. They keep shifting positions. But at least 40, possibly more. Sera felt the blood drain from her face. 90 werewolves? Because of me. Because of what you represent, Elena corrected sharply. Sit down, child. You look ready to faint. Elena guided Sera to a massive leather chair near the fireplace, then moved to one of the bookshelves with surprising speed. She pulled down a thick volume bound in what looked like dragon hide and opened it to a page marked with a silver ribbon. The Blackthorne Prophecy, Elena said, her voice taking on the cadence of a formal recitation. Written by the Oracle of the Sacred Grove 300 years ago. She began to read from the ancient text. When the moon bleeds silver and the old bloodlines wake, the last daughter of Moonfire shall rise from shadow into light. She who can heal the dying and command the living, who speaks to spirits and bends nature to her will. In her hands lies the power to unite the packs under one banner, or see them destroyed in endless war. 3 paths lie before her. The path of the conqueror, who would bend all wolves to her will. The path of the healer, who would unite them in peace. Or the path of the destroyer, who would burn the supernatural world to ash rather than see it corrupted. Choose wisely, daughter of Moonfire, for the choice once made cannot be undone. And know that your fated mate shall be your anchor in the storm to come, if you have the courage to claim him as he would claim you. Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Sera stared at the ancient book, her mind reeling with the implications of what she'd just heard. That's about me, she whispered. Every major pack knows this prophecy, Elena confirmed. It's why they're here. Some want to be on the winning side when you choose your path. Others want to eliminate you before you can make that choice. And a few, her pale eyes shifted to Kieran. A few want to claim you for themselves, believing they can control your decision through the mate bond. But I don't want to conquer anyone, Sera protested. I don't want to destroy anything. I just want... What? Elena's voice was gentle but implacable. To go back to your quiet life? To pretend this power doesn't exist? Child, you lit up the supernatural world like a beacon when your abilities awakened. There is no hiding from what you are now. Kieran moved to stand behind Sera's chair, his hands settling on her shoulders in a gesture of comfort and protection. She doesn't have to choose anything tonight, he said firmly. First, she learns control. Then, when she's ready, she can decide how to use her gifts. And if the other packs don't give her that time? Grayson asked from the doorway. Before anyone could answer, a howl rose from the forest outside. Long, challenging, and entirely too close to the pack house. It was answered by dozens of others, creating a symphony of threat that made every werewolf in the room tense with anticipation. They're moving closer, Elena observed with remarkable calm. Kieran, you need to respond before they interpret our silence as weakness. I know. Kieran's hands tightened on Sera's shoulders. Grayson, call in all our border patrols. I want every Nightshade wolf between the pack house and our uninvited guests. And then I go remind them why crossing into my territory uninvited is a very bad idea. No. Sera stood abruptly, her power flaring with determination. I'm not hiding behind your pack while others fight my battles. Sera. No, she repeated more firmly this time. This is happening because of me. I won't let your people get hurt protecting me from something I should face myself. You're not ready, Kieran said bluntly. Your power is still unstable. In a combat situation, I'll learn fast. Sera turned to face him, and the silver light beneath her skin pulsed brighter. You said I needed to stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like a Luna. Well, what would a Luna do in this situation? Kieran's golden eyes flashed with pride and exasperation in equal measure. A smart Luna would listen to her alpha's advice about pack defense. And a strong alpha would trust his mate to know her own capabilities, Sera shot back. Elena cleared her throat pointedly. While you two sort out your dominance dynamic, perhaps I should mention that the approaching packs have just requested a formal audience. What? Kieran spun toward his grandmother. Marcus just howled the traditional challenge pattern. He's requesting permission to enter pack lands under the old laws for a formal negotiation. Elena's expression was grim. He's invoking the right of parley. Meaning he wants to make an offer for Sera's hand in mating. In public, where refusing could be interpreted as an act of cowardice or weakness. Sera felt sick. Can he do that? Just claim me like property. Under the old laws, any unmated alpha can challenge for the right to court a Luna, Elena explained. It's an archaic tradition, but technically still binding. If Kieran refuses the challenge. I'm not refusing anything, Kieran snarled, his power filling the room like a physical presence. But I'm not letting her be paraded in front of a pack of wolves who see her as a prize to be won either. Then what do you suggest? Grayson asked. Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the windows where shapes could be seen moving between the trees. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. We accept the parley, but we do it on our terms. He turned to Sera, his golden eyes blazing with fierce protectiveness. If you're determined to face this head-on, then we'll show them exactly what kind of Luna they're dealing with. But you follow my lead, and you don't let your power spike unless I give you the signal. What signal? Kieran's smile was all predator. Trust me, you'll know it when you see it. Another howl echoed from the forest, this one closer and more insistent. Elena moved to the window and peered through the reinforced glass. They're forming a circle around the pack house, she reported. Traditional challenge formation. They mean business. So do we, Kieran replied. He turned to Sera, his expression softening slightly. Are you certain about this? Once we step outside, there's no taking it back. Every supernatural in the Pacific Northwest will know exactly what you are and where you stand. Sera thought of her quiet life in Millhaven, of the library that had been her sanctuary, of the peaceful anonymity she'd lost forever when her power awakened. Then she thought of the prophecy Elena had read, of the 3 paths laid out before her, and of the mate bond thrumming between her and the alpha who was willing to risk everything to protect her. I'm certain, she said, but I have one condition. Name it. Whatever happens out there, we face it as equals. I'm not your property to be defended, and you're not my keeper. We're partners or we're nothing. Kieran studied her face for a long moment, then slowly smiled. Partners, he agreed, but partners who trust each other's expertise. You handle the supernatural politics and power displays. I handle the werewolf dominance games and potential violence. Deal. Sera held out her hand, and when Kieran clasped it, silver fire danced along their joined fingers. Now let's go show them what a real Luna looks like. Elena's approving nod was the last thing Sera saw before Kieran led her toward the pack house doors. beyond which 90 hostile werewolves waited to discover whether the last Blackthorne heir would be their salvation or their doom. Chapter 5. The moment Sera and Kieran stepped outside the pack house, the forest fell silent. Even the storm seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. In the clearing before them, 3 distinct groups of werewolves had arranged themselves in a perfect circle, their eyes glowing in the darkness like fallen stars. "Stay close," Kieran murmured, his voice barely audible. "And remember, show strength, not fear. They can smell both." Sera nodded, her power humming beneath her skin like a live wire. She could feel the supernatural tension radiating from every wolf present, their predatory instincts sharpened by proximity to power they'd only heard about in legends. Marcus stepped forward from the western group, his rogue pack flanking him with barely controlled aggression. To the east, a woman with silver hair and arctic blue eyes led what had to be the Silvermoon Coalition. Her bearing spoke of generations of alpha bloodline and absolute confidence in her authority. From the south came a massive man whose presence made even Marcus look small, his dark skin marked with ritual scars that suggested the Ironwood pack still followed the old ways. "Kieran Nightshade," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Alpha King of the Northern Territories. We invoke the right of parley under the ancient laws." "Speak your business," Kieran replied, his tone neutral but his posture radiating controlled violence. The silver-haired woman stepped forward. "I am Lioness Silvermoon, Alpha Prime of the Eastern Coalition. We come to witness the awakening of the Blackthorne heir and offer our protection." Her cold gaze fixed on Sera. "The prophecy speaks of 3 paths, child. Choose wisely." "Protection." Kieran's laugh held no humor. "You mean subjugation. Your protection always comes with strings attached, Lioness." "As does yours," the massive man from the south interjected. His voice was like distant thunder, rich and deep. "I am Tobias Ironwood, Alpha of the Southern Territories. We remember the old alliances, when pack fought alongside pack rather than scheming for dominance." He inclined his head respectfully to Sera. "Your great-grandmother once healed my grandfather's entire pack when plague threatened to destroy us. The Ironwood wolves do not forget their debts." Sera felt a flicker of surprise. "You knew my great-grandmother?" "The debt was passed down through the generations, as was the story. Luna Blackthorne saved 300 wolves with her healing gift, asking nothing in return." Tobias's dark eyes were serious. "We offer the same freely given protection she once gave us." "How touching," Marcus sneered. "But debts to the dead don't change the reality of the living. The girl is untrained, unstable, dangerous. She needs guidance from those who understand power." His predatory gaze swept over Sera like a physical touch. "Join with my pack, Little Moon. I'll teach you to embrace what you are instead of fearing it." "And what exactly do you think I am?" Sera asked, her voice carrying more confidence than she felt. Marcus's smile was all teeth. "A weapon waiting to be wielded. The prophecy doesn't lie. You could unite every pack under one banner or burn the supernatural world to ash. Either option has its appeal." "For you, perhaps," Lioness interjected smoothly. "The coalition offers something more civilized. Join with us, and your power will be guided by wisdom, tempered by restraint. We can teach you to heal rather than harm, to build rather than destroy." "Under your control," Kieran observed. "Under our guidance," Lioness corrected. "The girl clearly cannot manage her abilities alone. Look around you. Her mere presence has destabilized the entire region. Without proper training, she'll destroy everything she touches." Sera felt her power spike in response to the casual dismissal, silver light beginning to pour from her skin. "I'm standing right here," she said, her voice edged with something that made every wolf in the clearing take an involuntary step backward. "And I'm perfectly capable of speaking for myself." "Are you?" Marcus challenged. "Then speak, Little Moon. Tell us which path you choose. Conqueror, healer, or destroyer. The prophecy says you must choose." "The prophecy," Sera repeated slowly, "was written by someone who wasn't me, about a future that hadn't happened yet. I don't believe in predetermined destiny." A murmur rippled through the assembled wolves. Several looked shocked, others intrigued, and a few appeared genuinely offended by her dismissal of sacred prophecy. "You cannot simply ignore what is written," Lioness said sharply. "The oracle's words have never been wrong." "Maybe because people keep fulfilling them instead of writing their own stories," Sera replied. Her power was building now, responding to her conviction, and she could feel every supernatural creature in the clearing reacting to it. I'm not interested in being anyone's weapon, guide, or prize. I'm interested in learning what I can do and deciding for myself how to use it. With him as your teacher? Marcus gestured dismissively at Kieran. What could the Northern Wolves possibly offer that we cannot? Respect, Sera said simply. Partnership instead of ownership. The chance to grow into my power instead of being molded by it. Pretty words, Tobias rumbled. But what happens when your power grows beyond what any one pack can contain? What happens when other supernatural species take notice of what's awakening in these mountains? Other species? Sera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Vampires, witches, fey courts. They all have an interest in maintaining the balance of power, Lyanna explained. A Blackthorne at full strength could tip the scales dramatically. Some will want to ally with you. Others will see you as a threat to be eliminated. Which is why you need the protection of a major alliance, Marcus added. Not the scattered remnants of the northern packs. Kieran's power flared in response to the insult, and suddenly the air between the two alphas crackled with supernatural tension. Careful, Marcus. You're a guest here, but my hospitality has limits. As does my patience, Marcus shot back. You've had your chance to prove your worth, Nightshade. Your pack is small, isolated, weakened by years of avoiding conflict. What can you offer her that we cannot? Before Kieran could respond, Sera stepped between them, her own power blazing bright enough to cast shadows across the clearing. What he can offer me, she said, her voice carrying the authority she was only beginning to understand, is something none of you seem to comprehend. Choice. The silver light pouring from her skin intensified, and suddenly she could feel every wolf present. Their fears, their desires, their pack bonds, and personal ambitions. She could sense Lyanna's cold calculation, Marcus's hungry possession, Tobias's genuine honor mixed with desperate pragmatism. And beneath it all, the complex web of supernatural politics that had brought them all here. You're all so focused on what I might become that you've forgotten what I am right now, Sera continued. I'm a woman who had her entire world turned upside down in one night. I'm confused, overwhelmed, and yes, probably dangerous. But I'm not a child to be guided, a weapon to be wielded, or a prize to be claimed. She turned in a slow circle, making eye contact with representatives from each pack. You want to know which path I'll choose? Here's my answer. I choose the path where I get to remain myself while learning to master abilities I never asked for. I choose the path where my mate bond is based on partnership rather than protection. And I choose the path where I'm surrounded by people who see me as Sera Blackthorne first and the last Moonfire heir second. The clearing fell silent except for the sound of wind in the trees and the distant rumble of thunder. Sera could feel the weight of every gaze upon her. The supernatural tension stretched to the breaking point. And if that path leads to conflict? Tobias asked quietly. Then we face it together, Kieran said, moving to stand beside her. As equals. As partners. As mates who chose each other freely. Pretty words, Marcus snarled. But choices have consequences. Refuse our offers now, and don't expect us to come running when you realize you're in over your head. I wouldn't dream of it, Sera replied coolly. Lyanna's arctic gaze studied Sera for a long moment. You're making a mistake, child. Power without guidance is destruction waiting to happen. When you inevitably lose control, remember that we offered you a better way. When I master my abilities, Sera corrected, I'll remember that you offered me a cage with prettier bars. The Silvermoon Alpha's expression hardened. So be it. But know this, the Coalition will be watching. One incident of uncontrolled power that threatens innocent lives, and we will act to contain you. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Before the confrontation could escalate further, a new howl echoed across the mountains, distant but unmistakably different from any they'd heard before. This one carried undertones of ancient power and otherworldly authority that made every werewolf present freeze with instinctive recognition. What was that? Sera whispered. Elena's voice drifted from the pack house doorway, where she'd been listening to the entire exchange. That, my dear, was a vampire lord announcing his arrival. It seems word of your awakening has reached the other supernatural courts. The assembled werewolves began to shift nervously, pack loyalties temporarily forgotten in the face of a greater threat. Vampires and werewolves had maintained an uneasy truce for decades, but that balance was delicate under the best of circumstances. This changes things, Tobias said grimly. if the vampires are getting involved. Then we have bigger problems than interpack politics, Kieran finished. Grayson, his beta appeared at the pack house entrance. Alpha, double the perimeter guards and activate the blood wards. No vampire crosses onto Nightshade lands without a formal invitation. And us? Marcus asked. Do we maintain the parley, or? Another howl, closer this time, cut him off. This one was answered by several others, creating a harmony that spoke of coordinated movement and significant numbers. How many vampires travel in a group? Sera asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Depends on their purpose, Elena replied. A diplomatic mission might include a lord and a few guards. A hunting party. She trailed off meaningfully. Could be dozens, Lyanna finished. And if they're hunting, we're all in danger. The pack politics that had seemed so important moments ago suddenly felt trivial compared to the approaching threat. Sera could feel the shift in supernatural dynamics, the way ancient enmities took precedence over newer conflicts. What do they want with me? She asked. The same thing we all want, Kieran said grimly. To understand what you're capable of. The difference is vampires have no qualms about vivisection in the name of research. Vivise. Sera's power flared with sudden fear and anger. They want to experiment on me? Not if I can help it, Kieran growled, his protective instincts blazing through their mate bond. Not if any of us can help it, Tobias added, surprising everyone. Whatever our differences, we don't let vampires hunt werewolves on our lands. Marcus nodded reluctantly. The rogue packs agree. This is wolf territory. Even Lyanna's cold expression showed a flicker of approval. The coalition stands with the packs on this matter. For the first time since the parley began, Sera felt a spark of hope. You're saying you'll work together? To protect me from the vampires. We're saying we'll work together to protect werewolf sovereignty, Lyanna corrected. Your safety is a beneficial side effect. I'll take it, Sera said. The distant howls were getting closer, and now they could hear other sounds in the darkness. The flutter of wings too large to be natural. The whisper of movement that suggested creatures not bound by earthly limitations. They're not just vampires, Elena called from the doorway, her voice tight with concern. I can smell magic on the wind. Which magic? They've brought allies. How many different supernatural species want a piece of me? Sera asked desperately. All of them, Kieran replied. You represent a shift in the balance of power that hasn't been seen in centuries. Everyone wants to know which side you'll land on when the dust settles. And if I don't want to land on any side, then you'd better learn to fly, he said grimly. Because neutrality isn't an option when you're the most powerful supernatural born in a generation. The sound of wings overhead grew louder, and shadows began to move through the forest with unnatural speed. Whatever was coming, they were almost here. Defensive positions, Kieran ordered, his alpha voice cutting through the supernatural tension. Whatever our differences, we're all werewolves tonight. The three enemy packs moved with practiced efficiency, forming a defensive perimeter around the pack house that put their backs to each other and their fangs toward the approaching threat. It was a temporary alliance born of necessity rather than trust, but it was more unity than Sera had dared to hope for. What do I do? She asked. Stay close to me, Kieran replied. And if things go badly? They won't, Sera interrupted, silver fire beginning to dance along her skin. Because I refuse to be anyone's victim or experiment. These vampires want to see what a Blackthorne can do. Fine, let's show them. Her power blazed brighter, reaching out to touch every werewolf in the clearing. She could feel their pack bonds, their shared determination, their willingness to fight and die for territory that was theirs by right of blood and tooth and claw. And for the first time since her abilities had awakened, Sera felt like she might actually be able to control what was happening to her. The first vampire emerged from the tree line like a shadow-given form, pale and beautiful and utterly inhuman. Behind him came others, dozens of them, moving with the fluid grace of apex predators. But they weren't the only threat materializing from the darkness. Chapter 6. The vampire lord who stepped into the clearing moved like liquid shadow made flesh. Tall and pale, with platinum hair that caught the moonlight like spun silver. He wore his supernatural beauty like a weapon designed to disarm and destroy. When he smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed like polished ivory, every werewolf present growled in response. Such hostility, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of centuries and distant courts. And here I thought werewolves prided themselves on hospitality to travelers. Not when those travelers bring uninvited armies, Kieran replied, his tone deadly calm. State your business, bloodsucker. The vampire's laugh was like crystal breaking. Such crude language from the Alpha King. I am Lord Alexander Drackle, emissary of the Eastern Vampire Courts. I come seeking audience with the newly awakened Blackthorne heir. Audience denied, Sera said before anyone else could speak. I don't do meet and greets with creatures who travel with enough backup to level a small city. Alexander's pale eyes fixed on her with predatory interest. Ah, but you misunderstand, dear one. I bring protection, not threat. The courts have heard of your awakening, and we wish to offer our services. What kind of services? Lina asked suspiciously. The kind that ensure a young woman of extraordinary power doesn't accidentally trigger a supernatural war through inexperience, Alexander replied smoothly. Vampires have been managing our abilities for millennia. We could teach her control, restraint, the delicate art of wielding power without destroying everything she touches. In exchange for what? Tobias's voice rumbled with distrust. Alliance, naturally. The vampire's courts have long sought closer ties with the werewolf packs. A Blackthorne bonded to our cause would benefit everyone. Bonded how? Sera's power flared with sudden alarm. Alexander's smile widened. Nothing as crude as the mate bonds you wolves favor. We speak of political alliance, mutual benefit, shared knowledge. Though if you find our company appealing, other arrangements could certainly be discussed. Kieran's growl was low and dangerous. Over my dead body. That, Alexander said pleasantly, could certainly be arranged. The clearing erupted into snarling tension as vampires and werewolves faced off across a few yards of moonlit grass. But before violence could break out, a new voice cut through the supernatural posturing. Enough! The word carried power that made every creature present freeze mid-motion. From the forest emerged a woman who looked to be in her 30s, with wild dark hair and eyes that held the weight of ancient knowledge. She wore simple clothes that couldn't hide the raw magical energy radiating from her like heat from a forge. A witch, Elena breathed from the pack-house doorway. Not just any witch, the newcomer corrected, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I am Morgana Blackwood, High Priestess of the Western Covens, and I'm here to collect what belongs to us. I don't belong to anyone, Sera said firmly, though her power was reacting strangely to the witch's presence. Not with hostility, but with something like recognition. Don't you? Morgana's knowing smile was unsettling. Tell me, child, where do you think your grandmother learned to tend that herb garden of hers? Where did she acquire those old books of healing lore you found in her attic after she died? Sera's breath caught. You knew my grandmother? Lydia Blackthorne was one of our most gifted students before she chose the mundane world over her magical heritage. She never completed her training, never learned to fully control the gifts that made her such a powerful healer. Morgana stepped closer, and Sera could smell ozone and otherworldly herbs on her skin. But you could. Your bloodline carries both werewolf and witch heritage, child. The Moonfire you command isn't just shifter magic. It's pure elemental power filtered through generations of magical breeding. That's impossible, Kieran said. The Blackthorne line is pure werewolf nobility. Is it? Morgana's laugh held dark amusement. How do you think they gained the ability to heal any injury, to commune with nature spirits, to command obedience from supernatural creatures? That's not werewolf magic, Alpha King. That's witchcraft refined through centuries of bloodline enhancement. Sera felt the world tilting around her as puzzle pieces she hadn't known existed suddenly clicked into place. The way her power felt different from what she sensed in the werewolves around her. The instinctive understanding of herb lore she'd inherited from her grandmother. The strange familiarity she felt when handling the ancient grimoire. You're saying I'm not fully werewolf? I'm saying you're something far more interesting, Morgana replied. A hybrid bloodline that shouldn't exist but does. Werewolf nobility crossed with witch royalty, creating something entirely new. And entirely powerful. This is irrelevant, Alexander interjected smoothly. Whatever her heritage, the girl clearly needs guidance from those experienced in managing supernatural abilities. Yes, Morgana agreed. From us. The witches have prior claim on her training. Prior claim. Marcus snarled. She's wolf-born on werewolf territory. That makes her pack business. Half wolf-born, Morgana corrected. And magical training supersedes territorial claims when the safety of the mundane world is at stake. The safety of... Sera's power flared with sudden realization. You're all afraid of me. Every single one of you. You're not here to help or protect or guide me. You're here because you think I'm going to lose control and expose the supernatural world to humans. The silence that followed was answer enough. Well, Sera continued, her voice growing stronger as silver light began to pour from her skin. Maybe you're right to be afraid. Her power reached out across the clearing, and suddenly she could feel every supernatural creature present. Not just their emotions and intentions, but their abilities, their weaknesses, their deepest fears. The vampires' thirst for blood and dominance. The witches' hunger for knowledge and control. The werewolves' desperate need for pack and territory and belonging. And underneath it all, the terrible fragility of the balance they were all fighting to maintain. You want to know what path I'll choose? Sera asked, her voice carrying across the clearing with supernatural authority. Here's what I see when I look at all of you. Vampires who treat humans like cattle. Witches who see mortals as inferior beings to be manipulated. Werewolves who live in the shadows because they're afraid of being hunted. She turned in a slow circle, her gaze touching each faction in turn. You've built your entire existence around the premise that humans can't handle the truth of what shares their world. But what if you're wrong? What if the real problem isn't human ignorance, but supernatural arrogance? You're talking about exposure, Lioness said, her voice tight with alarm. Complete revelation of our existence to the mundane world. I'm talking about integration, Sera corrected. About ending the lies and the hiding and the constant fear of discovery. That would be catastrophic, Alexander said sharply. Humans would panic. There would be wars, genocide, the complete breakdown of supernatural society. Would there? Sera's power pulsed brighter. Or would there be an adjustment period followed by a new normal? Humans have adapted to every other revelation in their history. They learned to accept that the earth was round, that they weren't alone in the universe, that their actions could affect global climate. Why are we so certain they couldn't adapt to us? Because we've seen what happens when they discover us, Tobias said grimly. The Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, the werewolf hunts of the 18th century. Humans kill what they fear. Some humans, Sera agreed, but not all of them. And fear grows in darkness. Brought into the light, examined and understood, it loses much of its power. This is theoretical philosophy, Morgana said impatiently. We're here to deal with practical reality. Your power is destabilizing the supernatural world, whether you intend it to or not. Every moment you remain untrained increases the risk of exposure. Then train me, Sera said simply. All of you. Stop fighting over who gets to control my education, and start working together to help me master what I can do. Impossible, Alexander said immediately. Vampires and werewolves have fundamental incompatibilities. Our teaching methods would conflict. Witches and shifters approach magic from entirely different philosophical frameworks, Morgana added. Joint training would be ineffective at best, dangerous at worst. So you'd rather risk me accidentally leveling a city than cooperate with each other for a few months? Sera asked. A few months. Marcus laughed harshly. Training of your magnitude could take years. Then you'd better start now, Sera replied. Because here's what's going to happen. You can either work together to help me learn control, or you can keep fighting over who owns me and watch me figure it out on my own. And I promise you, self-taught experimentation with this much power will be far more dangerous than cooperative education. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and Sera could feel the weight of decision pressing down on every supernatural present. She was asking them to overcome centuries of mistrust, territorial instincts, and species rivalry for the sake of training someone who might ultimately use that training against them. It was, she realized, probably an impossible request. But before anyone could respond, a new sound cut through the tension. The rumble of engines approaching through the forest. Human engines. Multiple vehicles moving fast toward their position. Hunters. Elena's voice carried from the packhouse doorway, tight with alarm. What? Sera spun toward the elder wolf. Human hunters. Armed, organized, and heading straight for us. Elena's pale eyes were grim. It seems your power flare earlier tonight was detected by more than just supernatural creatures. The implications hit Sera like a physical blow. You mean? I mean there are humans who know about our world, Kieran said grimly. And they've been hunting supernatural creatures for generations. Your awakening just lit up their detection equipment like a beacon. How many? Lyanna demanded. 20 vehicles, maybe more, Elena replied. Military-grade equipment from the sound of it. The various factions in the clearing looked at each other with sudden realization. Whatever their differences, they were all about to face a common enemy. One that would kill them all without hesitation if given the chance. Well, Alexander said with dark humor, it seems your theoretical discussion about human integration is about to become very practical indeed. Sera felt her power surge in response to the approaching threat, silver fire dancing along her skin as her abilities reached out to assess the danger heading toward them. What she sensed made her blood run cold. They have weapons designed specifically for supernatural creatures, she said, the knowledge flowing through her power like instinct. Silver rounds, wooden stakes, iron nets, some kind of magical containment devices. How many hunters? Tobias asked. At least 60. Maybe more. Sera's connection to the approaching force sent chills down her spine. And they're not just coming to observe. They're coming to capture or kill everything supernatural in these mountains. Including me? Especially you, Kieran said grimly. You're the biggest prize they could hope for. The sound of engines grew louder, and through the trees they could see lights approaching. Too many to count, too organized to be anything but a coordinated assault. So, Sera said, looking around at the assembled vampires, werewolves, and witch who moments ago had been ready to fight each other for control of her destiny. Are we going to stand here arguing about my training, or are we going to work together to make sure there's something left to train? The first explosion lit up the forest like artificial dawn, close enough to shake the ground beneath their feet. The war for Sera Blackthorne's soul was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 7. The first volley of silver bullets tore through the clearing like deadly rain, forcing supernatural creatures who had been enemies moments before to dive for cover together. Sera found herself pressed against the earth behind a fallen log, Kieran's body shielding her from above while Marcus of all people guarded her left flank. How did they find us so fast? She gasped, her power flaring with each explosion that rocked the forest around them. Your awakening sent energy signatures across half the continent, Morgana replied from where she crouched behind a boulder, her hands already weaving protective spells. Every hunter cell from California to Montana felt it. Another explosion, closer this time, showered them with dirt and burning debris. Through the smoke and chaos, Sera could see human figures moving through the trees. Dozens of them, armed with weapons that gleamed with more than just steel. Silver-core ammunition, Alexander observed with distaste, fangs extended as he prepared for battle. Iron-lined tactical gear. These aren't amateur monster hunters, they're professionals. Military, Tobias confirmed grimly. I can smell government funding and black budget operations. Which means they have backup extraction plans and absolutely no intention of leaving witnesses, Kieran snarled. Sera's power pulsed with growing alarm as she processed the implications. They're going to kill everyone? Even the werewolves who were just trying to live peacefully. Everyone, Lyanna confirmed, her Arctic composure cracking slightly. Humans don't distinguish between good and bad supernatural creatures when they're in full extermination mode. A hunter's voice amplified by electronic equipment cut through the battle noise. Attention supernatural entities. You are surrounded and outgunned. Surrender now for scientific study, or be terminated with extreme prejudice. Scientific study, Sera repeated, her voice deadly quiet. Vivisection, Kieran translated bluntly. They want to cut you apart to see how your power works. Something inside Sera snapped at the casual assumption that her life was forfeit to human curiosity. Silver fire erupted from her skin with enough force to illuminate the entire clearing, and suddenly she could feel every living thing for miles, human and supernatural alike. No, she said, rising to her feet despite the bullets still flying overhead. Absolutely not. Sera, get down. Kieran lunged for her, but her power pushed him back gently but irresistibly. I'm done hiding, she announced, her voice carrying supernatural authority that made every creature in the clearing freeze. I'm done being afraid, and I'm definitely done letting humans treat supernatural beings like specimens in a lab. Her power reached out across the battlefield, and suddenly she could see everything with crystalline clarity. 63 human hunters positioned in a perfect tactical formation. Military-grade weapons loaded with ammunition designed to kill or incapacitate supernatural creatures. Containment devices meant to hold beings like her for indefinite study. And underneath their professional competence, fear. Raw, primal terror of things they didn't understand and couldn't control. They're afraid, she said wonderingly. All that equipment, all that training, and they're absolutely terrified. Of course they are, Marcus snarled from his position. Were their nightmares made real? No, Sera corrected, her understanding deepening as her power touched the minds of the approaching hunters. They're afraid because they think we want to hurt them. They think supernatural creatures are inherently evil, inherently dangerous to humanity. Some of us are, Alexander pointed out with dark humor. But most of us just want to live in peace, Sera replied. Most of us have never harmed a human, would never choose to harm a human. These hunters are acting on fear based on the actions of a few. Noble sentiment, Lyanna said sharply, but irrelevant when they're shooting at us with silver bullets. Is it? Sera's power pulsed brighter, and she took a step toward the advancing hunters. What if we could show them who we really are? Sera, no, Kieran said urgently. Whatever you're thinking. I'm thinking it's time to stop hiding, she interrupted. Time to stop letting fear and ignorance drive the relationship between humans and supernatural beings. Her power exploded outward like a silver nova, washing over the entire battlefield with waves of Moonfire energy. But instead of attacking the hunters, it did something far more unexpected. It showed them the truth. Every human on the battlefield suddenly found themselves experiencing the memories and emotions of the supernatural creatures they were trying to kill. A hunter aiming at Tobias felt the werewolf's fierce love for his pack, his desperate desire to protect the cubs back home, his willingness to die for creatures who looked to him for safety. Another hunter targeting Lyanna experienced the alpha's centuries of loneliness, her careful restraint in never harming innocents, her exhaustion at maintaining the balance between human and supernatural worlds. The attack faltered as weapons lowered and soldiers staggered under the weight of sudden empathy. What did you do? Morgana demanded, her magical senses reeling from the complexity of Sera's working. I showed them who we really are, Sera replied, her power still flowing like silver water across the battlefield. All of us. The good, the bad, the complicated truth of supernatural existence. Through her connection to every mind present, she could feel the impact of her revelation. Some hunters were dropping their weapons entirely, overcome by the realization that they'd been preparing to murder sentient beings with families, hopes, and fears. Others were struggling to reconcile their training with the emotional truth of their target's experiences. But not all of them. Contact has been compromised. A harsh voice crackled over the hunter's communication system. Targets are using psychic influence. Switch to automated targeting systems and continue the mission. Automated. Sera's blood ran cold as she realized what that meant. They have machines that don't care about empathy, Kieran said grimly. Drones, probably. Remote-controlled weapons. The whine of approaching aircraft confirmed his words. Through the trees, Sera could see sleek military drones converging on their position, their weapons systems glowing with the cold light of technology rather than the warm complexity of human conscience. Can your power affect machines? Alexander asked urgently. I don't know, Sera admitted. I've never tried. Well, now would be an excellent time to experiment, Morgana said as the first drone opened fire with bullets that traced silver lines through the darkness. Sera reached out with her abilities, trying to connect with the approaching machines the way she had with the human hunters. But there was nothing there, no consciousness to touch, no emotions to share, just cold metal and programmed responses. They're not alive, she said desperately. I can't. Then we fight, Kieran snarled, his human form beginning to blur at the edges as his wolf strained for release. Old-fashioned tooth and claw. Against military drones? Marcus shook his head. We'll be slaughtered. Not if we work together, Tobias said, his dark eyes calculating. Coordinated supernatural abilities against automated systems. It's possible. It's suicide, Lyanna corrected, but even as she spoke, ice was forming around her hands in preparation for battle. Sera watched the drones circle overhead like mechanical vultures, their weapons systems tracking every supernatural signature in the clearing. In moments, they would open fire with silver rounds, iron nets, and whatever other anti-supernatural weapons the human military had developed. And then inspiration struck. I can't affect the machines directly, she said suddenly, but I can affect what powers them. What do you mean? Morgana demanded. Energy, Sera replied, her understanding crystallizing. Everything needs energy to function. Batteries, fuel cells, electrical systems. Her power pulsed as she reached out, not toward the drones themselves, but toward the electromagnetic fields that kept them aloft and operational. "You're going to try to drain their power sources?" Alexander asked. "I'm going to try to redirect their energy," Sera corrected. "Channel it into something useful instead of something destructive." She closed her eyes and let her Moonfire abilities expand beyond anything she'd attempted before. Instead of reaching for consciousness or emotion, she reached for the fundamental forces that govern technology: electricity, magnetism, the delicate balance of charged particles that made modern weapons possible. The first drone wavered in its flight path as its navigation systems flickered. "It's working," Kieran breathed. But the effort was enormous. Sera could feel her power stretching to its limits as she tried to simultaneously disable multiple aircraft while maintaining her empathic connection to the human hunters below. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and silver light poured from her skin like liquid starfire. "I can't hold this much longer," she gasped. "You don't have to hold it alone," Morgana said suddenly. Moving to Sera's side, the witch began weaving complex patterns in the air, her magic intertwining with Sera's Moonfire. "Witch power can amplify supernatural abilities. Let me help. And vampire speed can disable grounded targets while you handle the aerial threats," Alexander added, blurring into motion as he began systematically destroying the hunters' communication equipment. "Werewolf pack coordination," Tobias rumbled, shifting to his wolf form and howling a complex pattern that brought responding calls from werewolves throughout the forest. "We can ensure no hunter escapes to report what they've seen." For the first time since the battle began, the supernatural forces were working in true cooperation rather than reluctant alliance. Sera felt their combined abilities flowing through the mate bond she shared with Kieran, amplified by Morgana's magic, directed by vampire precision, and coordinated through werewolf pack instincts. The result was devastating to the human attack force. Drones fell from the sky as their electrical systems overloaded. Communication networks dissolved into static as vampire claws severed cables faster than human reflexes could track. Hunters found themselves surrounded by werewolves who appeared from the forest like shadows given fangs and fury. But it was Sera's power that turned the tide decisively. With supernatural support amplifying her abilities, she was able to maintain her empathic working while simultaneously draining the energy from every piece of technology the hunters had brought. "Weapons down," she commanded, her voice carrying supernatural authority enhanced by witch magic. "All of you. Now." To her amazement, most of the hunters obeyed. The combination of empathic connection and overwhelming supernatural display had broken their resolve. They dropped their silver bullets and iron nets, staring in awe at the beings they'd come to capture or kill. "This is impossible," one of them whispered. "The briefings said supernatural entities were mindless monsters." "Your briefings were wrong," Sera replied, her power allowing her to speak directly into every human mind present. "We're people. Different from you, but still people. We have families, hopes, fears, just like you do." "Then why do we hunt you?" another hunter asked, his voice breaking with the weight of sudden understanding. "Because some humans fear what they don't understand," Sera said gently. "And because some supernatural beings have given you reason to fear us. But most of us just want to live in peace." "The girl speaks truth," came a new voice from the forest edge. Every head turned as an elderly man emerged from the trees, wearing military insignia that marked him as the mission commander. But instead of hostility, his weathered face showed something like wonder. "Colonel Morrison," one of the hunters said in confusion. "Sir, we have the targets contained." "Stand down, soldier," Morrison ordered quietly. "All of you stand down." "Sir." "I felt it too," Morrison said, his gaze fixed on Sera. "When her power touched our minds, I saw. I understood." He shook his head as if trying to process an impossible revelation. 60 years I've been hunting supernatural creatures, convinced they were humanity's greatest threat. 60 years of kill orders and containment protocols. He walked slowly across the clearing, ignoring the supernatural beings who could have torn him apart with a thought. When he stopped in front of Sera, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "How many innocents have we killed?" he asked quietly. "How many families have we destroyed because we were too afraid to see the truth?" "Some of the beings you've hunted probably deserved it," Sera said honestly. There are supernatural creatures who prey on humans, who choose violence and cruelty. But most of us, she gestured to the werewolves, vampires, and witch who had fought beside her. Most of us just want to coexist peacefully. Morrison nodded slowly. What do you want from us? A chance, Sera replied. A chance to prove that integration is possible. That humans and supernatural beings can share this world without constant fear and violence. And if some of my superiors don't agree? If they order continued hunting operations? Sera's power pulsed gently, and she smiled. Then I guess you'll have to decide whether you're following orders or following your conscience. Morrison looked around the clearing, taking in the aftermath of a battle that had ended not in slaughter, but in understanding. I think I already have, he said quietly. Stand down, all units. Mission parameters have changed. Changed how, sir? A hunter called out. From termination to negotiation, Morrison replied. We're going to try something that should have been attempted decades ago. We're going to talk. As the immediate threat dissolved into tentative dialogue between humans and supernatural beings, Sera felt her power finally begin to stabilize. The crisis had pushed her abilities to their absolute limit, but it had also shown her something crucial. When supernatural creatures worked together instead of fighting each other, they were capable of amazing things. That was incredible, Kieran murmured, pulling her into his arms as the adrenaline finally began to fade. You didn't just save us from the hunters. You changed everything. We changed everything, Sera corrected, looking around at the unlikely alliance that had formed in the heat of battle. All of us working together. The question is, Morgana said, her magical senses still extended to monitor the situation. What happens now? You've opened the door to human supernatural integration, but actually walking through it will be far more complicated than winning one battle. I know, Sera replied, but it's a start, and sometimes starting is the hardest part. Alexander approached, his pale features thoughtful. The vampire courts will be interested in these developments. Integration has been discussed in theory for centuries, but never attempted in practice. The werewolf packs will have mixed reactions, Tobias added. Some will see this as an opportunity. Others will view it as an unacceptable risk to pack security. And the witch covens will want to study every aspect of what just happened, Morgana said with academic enthusiasm. The way you combined empathic power with technological disruption was unprecedented. Sera looked around at the supernatural beings who had been enemies hours ago, and were now discussing the future of human-supernatural relations, like colleagues planning a complex project. So you're all willing to try? She asked. To work together on integration instead of fighting over who controls my training. Controlling you appears to be impossible, Lyanna observed with dry humor. And after what we just witnessed, I'm not certain control would be advisable even if it were achievable. The girl has proven she can bring out the best in all of us, Tobias rumbled. Perhaps that's more valuable than any single faction's guidance. Agreed, Alexander said. Joint training, cooperative development of her abilities, shared responsibility for integration negotiations with human authorities. It's unprecedented, but then so is she. Sera felt a warm glow of satisfaction that had nothing to do with her Moonfire powers. Then let's make history, she said. Together. As dawn began to break over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that matched the hope rising in her chest, Sera Blackthorne knew that her quiet life as a small-town librarian was truly over. But what was beginning in its place might be something far more extraordinary than any prophecy had ever imagined. Chapter 8. 3 weeks after the battle that changed everything. Sera stood in the center of a training circle carved into the mountain meadow behind the Nightshade pack house, sweat beading on her forehead as she struggled to maintain control over forces that seemed determined to consume her from within. Focus, Morgana commanded from her position at the eastern point of the circle. Your power is scattered, unfocused. You're trying to do everything at once instead of mastering one ability at a time. Easy for you to say, Sera gasped, silver fire dancing erratically along her skin. You're not the one feeling like you might explode if you breathe wrong. Around the training circle, her unlikely team of instructors watched with varying degrees of concern and fascination. Alexander lounged against a pine tree with vampire grace, his pale eyes tracking every flicker of her power. Kieran paced the circle's perimeter like a caged wolf, his protective instincts warring with his understanding that she needed to push her limits to grow stronger. Elena sat on a wooden bench with ancient texts spread across her lap, occasionally calling out observations about Blackthorne bloodline traits that might explain what they were witnessing. The problem, Alexander observed with clinical detachment, is that you're approaching this like a werewolf trying to control a shift. But Moonfire isn't pack magic. It's elemental force filtered through bloodline genetics. You can't dominate it. You have to seduce it. Seduce it. Sera's power flared with indignation. It's not a person, it's energy. All energy has personality, Morgana corrected. Which magic teaches us to work with elemental forces as partners rather than tools. Your Moonfire responds to emotion, intention, relationship. Treat it like a lover rather than a weapon. The suggestion made Sera's cheeks burn, especially with Kieran listening to every word. Their mate bond had deepened significantly over the past 3 weeks, but they'd been so focused on training and integration negotiations that they hadn't had time to explore the more intimate aspects of their connection. Demonstrate, she said to Morgana, desperate to redirect her thoughts away from her alpha mate's increasingly heated presence in their bond. The witch stepped into the circle, her movements fluid and confident. She raised her hands, and immediately the air around her began to shimmer with power that felt entirely different from Sera's Moonfire. Earthier, more grounded, tinged with the green vitality of growing things. Earth magic, Morgana explained as vines began to spiral up from the soil around her feet. I don't command the earth to obey me. I ask it to dance with me. I show it what I need, and it shows me how to achieve it together. The vines continued to grow, weaving themselves into complex patterns that pulsed with life and beauty. It was magic as art, power as partnership, control through cooperation rather than domination. Now you try, Morgana said, stepping back out of the circle. Don't try to force your Moonfire to do what you want. Ask it what it wants to do, then guide that natural inclination toward your goal. Sera closed her eyes and reached inward, feeling for the silver fire that lived in her blood. Instead of trying to grab it and shape it, she simply listened. What she heard made her gasp. Her power wasn't chaotic or uncontrolled, it was lonely. The Moonfire had been dormant for so long, trapped in bloodline genetics with no outlet for expression, that now it was desperate to connect with everything around it. Her struggles with control weren't about the power being too strong. They were about it trying to touch too much too fast. It wants to heal, she whispered, understanding flooding through her. Everything. Everyone. It can sense pain and injury and emotional wounds, and it wants to fix all of it at once. Ah, Elena said with satisfaction. That's classic Blackthorne behavior. Your great-grandmother had the same problem. She couldn't walk through a hospital without trying to heal every patient. So how do I teach it restraint? You don't, Kieran said, his voice rough with emotion. You teach it priorities. Sera opened her eyes to find him standing at the edge of the circle, his golden gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. What do you mean? Your power wants to heal everything, but it responds to your emotions, your connections, your love. He stepped into the circle, ignoring Morgana's sharp intake of breath. So show it what matters most to you. Let it feel your priorities through the mate bond. Kieran, that's not safe, Alexander warned. If her power spikes while you're in direct contact, then it spikes, Kieran said simply. She needs an anchor, something to ground her power in relationship rather than abstract control. The mate bond is the strongest connection she has. Sera felt her Moonfire respond to his presence, silver light beginning to pour from her skin in waves. But instead of the chaotic explosion she'd been fighting for weeks, the power flowed toward Kieran with purpose and precision. It recognizes you, she breathed. It wants to strengthen the bond between us. Then let it, Kieran replied, extending his hand toward her. The moment their fingers touched, power flowed between them like liquid starlight. Sera gasped as she felt Kieran's wolf spirit through their connection, wild and protective and utterly devoted to her well-being. Her Moonfire wrapped around his essence like silver chains, but instead of binding him, it seemed to complete him. Incredible, Morgana whispered. The power is using their mate bond as a focusing lens. Instead of trying to heal everything at once, it's prioritizing based on emotional connection. Which means what exactly? Sera asked, though she was finding it difficult to concentrate on anything except the way Kieran's presence steadied her abilities. It means your control will always be strongest when you're working to protect or heal people you care about, Elena explained. The Moonfire responds to love, loyalty, pack bonds. The more connected you feel to someone, the more precisely you can direct your abilities toward helping them. And the less connected I feel, the less control you'll have, Alexander said bluntly, which could be problematic if you're ever forced to defend yourself against strangers. Before anyone could respond to that disturbing observation, a howl echoed across the mountains, but not from any werewolf throat. This sound was mechanical, electronic, and entirely too familiar. Drones, Kieran snarled, his head snapping toward the sky. Military drones. Through their mate bond, Sera felt his instant shift from training partner to alpha protector. His power flared as he prepared to defend his territory, and her Moonfire responded by blazing brighter than it ever had before. I thought Colonel Morrison called off the hunting operations, she said. Morrison's unit did, Elena replied grimly. But he's not the only authority in the human military, and not everyone was happy about his decision to negotiate rather than terminate. The drones crested the ridge overlooking the meadow, sleek, predatory machines that moved with mechanical precision. But these weren't the same models they'd faced weeks ago. These were larger, more heavily armed, and they radiated a coldness that spoke of upgraded technology designed specifically for supernatural targets. How many? Morgana demanded, her hands already weaving defensive spells. 6 that I can see, Alexander replied, his vampire vision superior to human sight. But there are more coming. I can hear their engines. We need to get Sera to safety, Kieran said immediately. No. Sera's voice carried absolute authority, and her power flared with determination. I'm done running from humans who think they can hunt us like animals. These drones are here because of me, which means I'm the one who needs to stop them. Sera. No, Kieran. I've spent 3 weeks learning to control my abilities. Time to find out if the training worked. She stepped away from him, moving to the center of the training circle as the drones began their attack approach. Silver fire poured from her skin like liquid moonlight, and for the first time since her awakening, she felt completely in control of the power flowing through her. The lead drone opened fire with bullets that gleamed with silver cores and iron tips, ammunition designed to kill or severely wound any supernatural creature. But Sera's Moonfire reached out and simply absorbed them. The metal dissolved into component elements as it touched her power, rendered harmless by forces that operated beyond the normal laws of physics. Impossible, Alexander breathed. Not impossible, Sera replied, her consciousness expanding as her abilities reached full strength. Just unprecedented. She could feel every drone in the approaching squadron, their electronic systems laid bare to her supernatural senses. But more than that, she could feel the humans controlling them. Military operators sitting in bunkers hundreds of miles away, viewing her and her friends as targets on a computer screen. You want to see what a Blackthorne can do? She asked, her voice carrying across the mountains with supernatural authority. Fine, let me show you. Her power reached out across impossible distances, following electronic signals back to their sources. In military installations across 3 states, computer screens began to flicker as Sera's Moonfire infiltrated their networks. But she didn't destroy their equipment. Instead, she did something far more effective. She forced the human operators to see what they were really attacking. Through security cameras and satellite feeds, she showed them the Nightshade pack house. Not as a target on a tactical display, but as a home where werewolf families lived and loved and raised their children in peace. She showed them Elena teaching young wolves about their heritage, Grayson organizing border patrols to protect both supernatural and human communities, Kieran working tirelessly to maintain the balance that kept both species safe. She showed them the truth. Stand down, came a voice through the drone's communication system. Not the cold electronic command they'd expected, but a human operator's shaken whisper. God in heaven, stand down. These aren't monsters. They're people. One by one, the drones powered down and began returning to their bases. Their operators had seen the truth of supernatural life, felt the reality of families and communities and individuals just trying to live in peace. But not all of them. The last drone remained active, its weapons systems charging for a final attack. Through her connection to its control signal, Sera could feel the operator's mind, cold, calculating, utterly convinced that supernatural beings were a threat that needed to be eliminated regardless of evidence to the contrary. Some humans will never accept us, she realized sadly. No matter what we show them, they'll always see us as enemies. Then we protect ourselves from those humans, Kieran said firmly. Just like we protect ourselves from any predator. The remaining drone launched its final attack. Not bullets this time, but some kind of energy weapon that crackled with electricity and magical interference. It struck Sera's Moonfire barrier and detonated in an explosion of light and force that shook the entire mountain. When the light faded, Sera was still standing, but the effort of deflecting the attack had pushed her power beyond its limits, and she could feel it beginning to spiral out of control. "Kieran," she gasped, silver fire pouring from her skin in uncontrolled waves. "I can't." He was beside her in an instant, his hands gripping hers as the mate bond flared to life between them. "I've got you," he said firmly. "We've got you." Through their connection, she felt not just Kieran's strength, but the pack bonds that connected him to every werewolf in the territory. Dozens of supernatural beings lending their power to help her regain control. Their combined will focused on keeping her grounded. "The pack," she whispered, understanding flooding through her. "That's what I was missing. Individual control is hard, but pack control is what werewolves do best," Kieran confirmed. "You're not alone in this, Sera. You never have to be alone again." Her power stabilized, flowing back into manageable channels as she drew strength from the network of connections that surrounded her. The Moonfire didn't disappear. If anything, it felt stronger than before. But now it was guided by more than just her individual will. It was supported by pack bonds, tempered by the wisdom of her teachers, anchored in the love she shared with her mate. "Better?" Morgana asked as the silver glow finally faded to manageable levels. "Better," Sera confirmed. "But we have a problem. Some humans will never accept supernatural integration, no matter what we do to prove we're not a threat. Then we'll deal with those humans as they come," Alexander said pragmatically. "The same way we've always dealt with those who hunt us." "No," Sera said firmly. "No more killing unless there's absolutely no other choice. That just proves their point about us being dangerous." "Then what do you suggest?" Elena asked. Sera looked around at her unlikely team of supernatural allies, her mind already working on the complex problem of human-supernatural relations. "We build bridges faster than they can tear them down. We find the humans who are willing to listen, willing to learn, willing to see us as people rather than monsters. And we show them a better way forward." "That could take years," Tobias observed, emerging from the forest where he'd been coordinating pack defenses. "Then we'd better get started," Sera replied. "Because the alternative is a war that nobody wins." As if summoned by her words, Kieran's satellite phone began ringing. He answered it with a terse nightshade. Then his expression grew increasingly grim as he listened to the voice on the other end. "That was Colonel Morrison," he said when he hung up. "He's managed to arrange a meeting with his superiors. A chance for us to present our case for integration directly to the human military leadership." "That's good news, right?" Sera asked, though something in Kieran's tone suggested otherwise. "Maybe. Or it could be a trap. Morrison seems genuine, but he's not the one making the final decisions." Kieran's golden eyes were troubled. "The meeting is in 3 days at a neutral location in Seattle. They want you there, Sera. They want to see the Blackthorne heir in person. Then they'll see her," Sera said with more confidence than she felt. "All of us will go. Vampires, werewolves, witches. We'll show them what cooperation looks like. And if they decide we're too dangerous to be allowed to live," Alexander asked bluntly. Sera's power pulsed beneath her skin, stronger and more controlled than it had ever been. "Then they'll discover exactly how dangerous a united supernatural community can be." But even as she spoke the words with conviction, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real test of her abilities, and her vision for human supernatural integration, was still to come. Chapter 9. The abandoned warehouse on the Seattle waterfront looked like the last place anyone would hold diplomatic negotiations between species. But Sera had to admit it was probably the most secure location available. No windows for snipers, multiple exit routes, and enough industrial steel to contain a supernatural battle if things went wrong. Which, given the tension radiating from every member of their delegation, seemed increasingly likely. "I don't like this," Kieran muttered for the 10th time as they approached the designated entrance. "Too many variables, too many ways for this to go sideways." "All negotiations carry risk," Alexander replied, though his pale features showed similar concern. "The question is whether the potential gain justifies the danger." "Integration justifies almost any risk," Sera said firmly, checking her appearance one last time in the side mirror of their SUV. She'd chosen to dress professionally but not formally. Dark slacks, a silk blouse, and a blazer that couldn't quite hide the silver pendant Elena had given her for protection. She wanted to look competent and approachable, not intimidating. "Remember," Morgana said from the passenger seat, "these humans have been conditioned to see us as threats for generations. Everything about our body language, our supernatural presence, even our scent will trigger their fight-or-flight responses. We need to project calm authority without dominance." "Easy for you to say." Tobias rumbled from his position in the second vehicle. Werewolves aren't exactly known for non-threatening body language. Through their mate bond, Sera could feel Kieran's internal struggle between his protective instincts and his understanding of what this meeting required. His wolf wanted to eliminate any potential threat to her safety, but his alpha intelligence knew that violence would destroy everything they'd worked toward. "Everyone stays calm," she said, her power reaching out to touch each member of their supernatural delegation. "We're here to build bridges, not burn them." Colonel Morrison met them at the warehouse entrance, his weathered face showing strain, but not hostility. Behind him stood a handful of other military personnel, all armed but not in aggressive positions. "Ms. Blackthorne," Morrison said formally, "thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy for any of you." "Thank you for arranging it," Sera replied. "I hope your superiors are as open-minded as you've proven to be." Morrison's expression flickered with something that might have been doubt. "They're concerned. About integration, about the security implications, about what happened to our drone squadrons last week." "Your drone squadrons attacked first," Kieran pointed out with careful neutrality. "I know, and I've made that clear in my reports. But some of my colleagues are more focused on the fact that a single supernatural individual was able to disable military equipment across 3 states without leaving her home territory." Sera felt her power pulse with defensive energy and forced it back under control. "I didn't damage your equipment. I showed your operators the truth about what they were attacking. The decision to stand down was theirs. Which terrifies them more than if you'd simply blown everything up," Morrison said bluntly. "Humans understand physical violence. We've been dealing with that for millennia. But the ability to reach into secure military installations and change how our people think." He shook his head. "That's the kind of power that keeps generals awake at night. Then maybe generals need to reconsider their approach to supernatural relations," Morgana suggested with wit sharp insight. "Maybe they do. But first, you need to convince them that you're not planning to use that power against human civilian populations." Morrison led them deeper into the warehouse, past security checkpoints that scanned for both conventional weapons and supernatural energy signatures. Sera noticed that her Moonfire barely registered on their equipment. Her power was too unlike anything they'd been designed to detect. "How many of them are there?" Alexander asked, his vampire senses probing ahead. 12 officials from various military and intelligence agencies," Morrison replied. "Plus security teams, technical staff, and a few specialists." "What kind of specialists?" Sera asked, though something in Morrison's tone made her suspect she wouldn't like the answer. "The kind that have been studying supernatural creatures for longer than the rest of us have been acknowledging they exist." The main floor of the warehouse had been converted into a conference room, with a large table surrounded by chairs and enough electronic equipment to run a small city. But what caught Sera's attention were the people waiting for them. She'd expected military brass, stern-faced generals and intelligence officials with calculating eyes. What she hadn't expected was the woman sitting at the head of the table, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her pale blue eyes. "Grandmother?" Sera breathed, recognizing the facial structure despite the decades that separated this woman from Elena Nightshade. "Not your grandmother," the woman replied with a voice like winter wind, "though we are related. I am Dr. Victoria Blackthorne, Director of the Department of Supernatural Affairs and your great-aunt." The warehouse fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment and the sound of Sera's heart hammering against her ribs. Her great-aunt was alive. Her great-aunt worked for the human government. Her great-aunt had been studying supernatural creatures while pretending they didn't exist. "That's impossible," Sera whispered. "The Blackthorne line died out except for my grandmother. Elena told me." "Elena Nightshade told you what the supernatural community believed," Victoria interrupted. "Not what was actually true. Some of us chose different paths than isolation in the wilderness." You chose to work with the people hunting us, Kieran snarled, his protective instincts flaring through their mate bond. I chose to work within human institutions to prevent the kind of genocidal campaigns that have historically resulted from fear and ignorance, Victoria corrected sharply. Do you think supernatural creatures would still exist if humans had been left to their own assumptions about what you are? You've been protecting us? Alexander's tone suggested deep skepticism. I've been managing you, Victoria replied, ensuring that exposure incidents were contained, that rogue supernatural actors were dealt with quietly, that the balance between species remained stable. It's thankless work that requires sacrificing personal relationships for the greater good. Sera felt her power spike with a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and desperate hope. You're saying you've been working for coexistence all along? I'm saying I've been preventing war all along. Coexistence was always the goal, but it required careful preparation, gradual introduction of concepts, decades of groundwork to make integration even theoretically possible. Victoria's pale eyes fixed on Sera with laser intensity. And then you awakened with all the subtlety of a nuclear detonation and undid 40 years of careful progress in a single night. The accusation hit Sera like a physical blow. I didn't ask for this to happen. No, you didn't. But it did happen, and now we're all dealing with the consequences. Victoria gestured to the assembled military officials, most of whom were watching the family confrontation with expressions ranging from fascination to alarm. Half the people in this room want to study you like a laboratory specimen. The other half want to eliminate you as a threat to national security. My job is to convince them that you can be managed without either extreme measure. Managed. Sera's power flared with outrage, silver light beginning to pour from her skin. I'm not a problem to be managed. I'm a person trying to find a way for humans and supernatural beings to coexist peacefully. Are you? Victoria's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. Or are you a naive young woman who thinks good intentions can overcome centuries of evolutionary programming? Before Sera could respond, one of the military officials, a stern-faced general with enough metals to armor a small tank, cleared his throat loudly. Dr. Blackthorne, if we could proceed with the formal briefing. Of course, General Patterson. Victoria's demeanor shifted immediately from family confrontation to professional presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Sera Blackthorne, last heir of the Moonfire bloodline, along with representatives from the major supernatural factions currently operating in the Pacific Northwest. The next hour passed in a blur of formal introductions, technical presentations, and questions that ranged from genuinely curious to barely concealed hostility. Sera found herself demonstrating her abilities under controlled conditions, healing a volunteer's old war injury, communing with the potted plants someone had brought for the purpose, and carefully showing how her power could enhance rather than threaten human technology. But through it all, she was acutely aware of Victoria's calculating gaze, studying every demonstration with the intensity of a scientist observing a particularly interesting experiment. Impressive, General Patterson said when the formal presentation concluded. But I think we all have the same question. What assurance do we have that these abilities won't be used against human civilian populations? The same assurance you give us that human military capabilities won't be used against supernatural communities, Sera replied. Mutual deterrence backed by mutual benefit. That's not how deterrence works, another official interjected. Deterrence requires equals. What you're describing is more like surrender. To cooperation? Sera asked. To the idea that we're all sharing the same planet and might as well figure out how to do it without killing each other. To the most powerful supernatural entity born in a century, the official corrected. Someone who could theoretically dominate human civilization if she chose to. Sera felt her power pulse with frustration. I don't want to dominate anyone. I just want. What you want is irrelevant, Victoria interrupted sharply. What matters is what you're capable of, and whether human institutions can trust supernatural communities to police themselves effectively. Self-policing has worked for centuries, Kieran pointed out. When supernatural populations were small, isolated, and actively hiding from human attention, Victoria replied. But integration changes those parameters dramatically. Larger supernatural communities, greater interaction with human populations, increased opportunity for conflicts that could destabilize the entire relationship. So what are you suggesting? Morgana asked, her witch senses clearly detecting undercurrents in the conversation that others were missing. Victoria smiled, and the expression reminded Sera uncomfortably of a predator revealing its teeth. I'm suggesting that integration will require oversight. Human oversight, to ensure that supernatural communities don't abuse their new status in human society. Oversight. Alexander's voice dropped to dangerous levels. You mean control? I mean regulation. The same way we regulate any potentially dangerous technology or capability. Victoria's tone remained professionally neutral, but Sera could sense the steel underneath. Supernatural registration, ability testing, regular monitoring to ensure compliance with integration protocols. The warehouse erupted into angry voices as every supernatural representative began, protesting simultaneously. But Sera found herself staring at her great-aunt with growing understanding and horror. This was never about integration, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. This was about finding a way to control us legally instead of hunting us illegally. This is about preventing a war that would devastate both species, Victoria corrected. And if that requires certain administrative measures, then so be it. Administrative measures? Sera's power began to build, silver fire dancing along her skin. You're talking about turning us into second-class citizens in our own world. I'm talking about ensuring that supernatural beings can't use their abilities to harm human populations without consequences, Victoria replied firmly. The registration and monitoring systems would protect humans from supernatural abuse and supernatural beings from human retaliation. By making us all suspects in crimes we haven't committed, Tobias rumbled. By creating accountability where none currently exists. Sera felt her control beginning to slip as her power responded to the rage and betrayal coursing through her veins. The whole thing had been a setup, not a negotiation, but a presentation of terms that had already been decided. And if we refuse? She asked quietly. Victoria's smile widened. Then we fall back on traditional methods of supernatural management. Hunting, containment, elimination when necessary. The choice is yours, Sera. Regulated integration or continued warfare. The ultimatum hung in the air like a poison cloud, and Sera realized with crystal clarity that everything she'd worked for, everything she'd hoped to achieve, was being twisted into a trap designed to enslave rather than liberate her people. There is a third option, she said finally, her power building to levels that made the electronic equipment around them flicker and spark. And what would that be? Victoria asked. Sera looked around the warehouse at the faces watching her. Some hopeful, some hostile, some merely calculating. Then she looked at her mate, her pack, her unlikely alliance of supernatural beings who had chosen to trust her vision of a better future. We walk away, she said simply. We go back to the mountains and build our own society, independent of human approval or oversight. We prove that supernatural beings can coexist peacefully without registering ourselves like weapons or submitting to monitoring like criminals. That would be secession, General Patterson said sharply. An illegal separation from established national authority. Only if you consider supernatural beings to be citizens subject to that authority, Sera replied. Which would be an interesting legal precedent to establish, considering we've never been granted citizenship rights in the first place. The implication hit the room like a thunderbolt. If supernatural beings weren't citizens, then human governments had no legal authority over them. But if they were citizens, then they were entitled to all the rights and protections that entailed, including the right to refuse discriminatory registration and monitoring. You're talking about civil war, Victoria said quietly. I'm talking about independence, Sera corrected. The right to self-determination that humans have been fighting for throughout their history. Her power pulsed brighter, and through their mate bond she felt Kieran's fierce pride in her decision. Around the table, she could sense the other supernatural representatives rallying to her cause, choosing freedom over safety, autonomy over approval. Think carefully about this, Sera, Victoria warned. Independence means giving up human protection, human resources, human cooperation in dealing with supernatural threats. We've been dealing with supernatural threats for centuries without human help, Kieran pointed out. And most of those threats wouldn't exist if humans stopped creating them through fear and ignorance. You're making a mistake, Victoria said, rising from her chair. Both of you. Integration under regulation is the best offer you're going to get. Walk away from this table, and the next conversation will be conducted through military action. Then I guess we'd better prepare for war, Sera replied, her power flaring bright enough to illuminate the entire warehouse. Because I refuse to trade one kind of cage for another. But even as she spoke the words with conviction, she could feel the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders like a crushing burden. By choosing independence over subjugation, she'd just committed every supernatural being in North America to a conflict that could destroy them all. The only question now was whether her vision of freedom was worth the price they were all about to pay. Chapter 10. The flight back to Nightshade territory passed in tense silence, broken only by the hum of helicopter rotors and the occasional crackle of radio communication. Sera sat pressed against Kieran's side, drawing strength from their mate bond while her mind raced with the implications of what they'd just chosen. War. Not the swift, decisive battle they'd fought against the hunters, but a prolonged conflict between species that could last for generations. And it would be her fault, because she'd refused to accept the cage her great-aunt had offered with such clinical precision. "You did the right thing," Kieran murmured, his voice barely audible over the aircraft noise. "Did I?" Sera's power pulsed with uncertainty. "I just condemned every supernatural being in North America to a war they didn't ask for." "You gave them a choice," Morgana corrected from across the cabin. "Registration and monitoring would have been slavery disguised as protection. Sometimes war is preferable to chains." "Easy to say when you're not the one responsible for starting it." "You didn't start anything," Alexander interjected, his pale eyes reflecting the helicopter's instrument lights. "This conflict has been brewing for centuries. Your awakening simply forced it into the open where it could be dealt with honestly." Sera wanted to believe them, but the weight of leadership sat heavily on her shoulders. Through the helicopter's windows, she could see the lights of human settlements scattered across the landscape below. Millions of people who had no idea their world was about to change forever. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we prepare," Tobias said grimly. "The human military will need time to mobilize resources for supernatural warfare. That gives us perhaps a week to establish defenses and coordinate with allied communities." "Allied communities? You think the Nightshade Pack is the only supernatural group that opposes human domination?" Alexander's smile was sharp with anticipation. "Your speech in that warehouse was broadcast to every major supernatural leader in North America. By morning, you'll have volunteers from across the continent." The thought of other supernatural beings rallying to her cause should have been comforting, but instead it terrified her. More people willing to fight and die for a vision she'd articulated in anger rather than careful planning. "We need a strategy beyond resist human control," she said. "Something positive to build toward, not just something negative to fight against." "Agreed," Kieran said. "But first we need to survive long enough to implement whatever vision we develop." The helicopter began its descent toward the Nightshade Pack house, and Sera could see lights blazing from every window despite the late hour. Word of their failed negotiations had obviously preceded their return. Elena met them on the landing pad, her silver hair whipping in the rotor wash as she approached. "How bad?" she asked without preamble. "Registration, monitoring, and regulation under threat of renewed hunting campaigns," Kieran replied tersely. Sera chose independence. "Good," Elena said firmly. "I've lived through one supernatural registration program. Never again." Sera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "One? When?" "Germany, 1935 to 1945, Elena replied, her pale eyes distant with memory. "Started with mandatory registration of supernatural abilities. Ended with camps and mass executions. The humans called it the final solution to the supernatural problem." The casual revelation hit Sera like a physical blow. The Holocaust included supernatural beings? "History is written by the survivors," Elena said grimly. "And supernatural victims rarely left written records. But yes, we were among the targeted populations. Werewolves, vampires, witches, anyone with abilities that threatened human ideas of normal. Which is why voluntary registration is impossible," Morgana added as they walked toward the pack house. "Once they have lists of who we are and what we can do, it becomes trivially easy to move from monitoring to imprisonment to elimination." The pack house's main hall had been transformed into a war room, with maps covering every available surface and communication equipment that looked more sophisticated than anything Sera had seen in the military warehouse. Pack members moved with purposeful efficiency, coordinating defenses and gathering intelligence while maintaining the quiet discipline of experienced fighters. "How many?" Kieran asked Grayson, who looked up from a radio console with grim satisfaction. 43 packs have declared for the independence movement as of an hour ago, his beta reported. Another dozen vampire courts, 7 witch covens, and a handful of smaller supernatural communities. The bears want to stay neutral, but they won't interfere with our operations. That's more than I dared hope for, Sera said, though the numbers also meant more lives that would be at risk because of her decision. It's also more than the humans were prepared for, Elena observed. Their intelligence estimates supernatural populations at perhaps 10% of actual numbers. They're about to discover that we've been far better at hiding than they were at finding. A new voice cut through the organized chaos from the direction of the front door, which will make the initial stages of this conflict very interesting indeed. Everyone turned as a figure emerged from the shadows near the entrance. Tall, elegant, with silver hair and an aura of power that made even the assembled supernatural leaders tense with recognition. Lady Silvermoon, Kieran said carefully. I wasn't expecting you personally. Recent events have moved beyond the scope of normal diplomatic channels, Lioness Silvermoon replied, her arctic gaze sweeping the assembled company before settling on Sera. The coalition has voted. We stand with the independence movement. Even though it means war? Sera asked. Especially because it means war, Lioness corrected. The human offer of regulated integration was unacceptable to any supernatural being with functioning survival instincts. Better to fight for freedom than accept slavery voluntarily. What about the Ironwood Pack? Tobias asked from his position near the strategy table. Already en route with 200 fighters, Lioness replied. They'll arrive before dawn. The scope of what was happening finally hit Sera with full force. This wasn't just the Nightshade Pack choosing independence. This was the entire supernatural community of North America uniting behind her decision to reject human control. I never intended to start a revolution, she whispered. All the best revolutions are unintentional, Elena said with dark humor. The planned ones usually end badly. This one might end badly too, Sera pointed out. Then we'd better make sure it doesn't, Kieran said firmly. He moved to the strategy table and spread out a large topographical map of the Pacific Northwest. The humans will strike here first, he said, pointing to the Nightshade territory. We're the most visible target, and eliminating the Blackthorne heir would deal a significant blow to supernatural morale. Let them come, Alexander said, his vampire features sharp with anticipation. These mountains have been werewolf territory for generations. The humans will be fighting on our ground, by our rules. It won't be like the Hunter assault, Morgana warned. This will be a full military operation. Air support, artillery. Enough firepower to level these mountains if they decide subtlety isn't worth the effort. Then we don't fight them here, Sera said suddenly. We make them fight us everywhere. All eyes turned to her as she approached the strategy table, her power humming with inspiration. They expect a conventional conflict. Supernatural communities hold up in defensive positions, while human military forces systematically eliminate them. But that's not how this has to work. What are you thinking? Kieran asked. I'm thinking about what my power showed me during the warehouse meeting, Sera replied. The human military depends on technology, communication networks, coordination between units scattered across vast distances, all of which requires electronic systems. You want to disable their technology? Lina asked. I want to do better than that, Sera said, her understanding crystallizing. I want to turn their technology against them. Show every human soldier, every drone operator, every intelligence analyst exactly what they're really fighting against. Not monsters, but people defending their families and communities. Mass empathic manipulation, Morgana breathed. On a continental scale, the energy requirements alone would be manageable if I'm not doing it alone, Sera interrupted. That's what I realized during our training. My power works best when it's connected to others, amplified by pack bonds and supernatural alliances. What if we could link every supernatural community in North America into a single network? The suggestion sent a ripple of shock through the assembled leaders. What Sera was proposing had never been attempted in supernatural history. The voluntary merger of hundreds of distinct communities into a unified consciousness. The logistics would be impossible, Alexander said. Vampires and werewolves have fundamental incompatibilities. Adding witches, fae, and other species would create either the most powerful supernatural alliance ever formed or the most spectacular magical disaster in recorded history, Elena finished. Possibly both simultaneously. But it could work, Sera pressed. Theoretically, Morgana admitted. If you could serve as the focal point, the common thread that connects disparate magical systems. Yes, it might be possible. The risk to you would be enormous, Kieran said, his protective instincts flaring through their mate bond. That much power flowing through one person, even temporarily, could kill me, Sera finished. Or change me into something that's no longer human enough to remember why we're fighting in the first place. Then we find another way, Kieran said firmly. There is no other way, Sera replied. Not if we want to end this conflict without destroying both species in the process. The humans are afraid of us because they don't understand us. Show them who we really are, let them feel what we feel, and that fear becomes the foundation for real cooperation. And if the process destroys you? Alexander asked bluntly. Sera was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the gravity it deserved. Through her mate bond with Kieran, she could feel his desperate hope that she would choose safety over sacrifice. But she could also feel the weight of every supernatural being who was looking to her for leadership, for a vision of the future worth fighting toward. If I die creating a world where supernatural beings can live freely alongside humans, then I die for something meaningful, she said finally. If I live in a world where we're all slaves or constantly at war, then what's the point of survival? There has to be a middle path, Kieran said desperately. Maybe there is, Sera agreed. But I can't see it from here. The Alliance Network is the only strategy one can think of that offers hope for something better than endless conflict. A commotion outside interrupted their debate. The sound of multiple vehicles approaching the pack house at high speed. Through the windows, they could see headlights cutting through the mountain darkness. Far too many to be a single pack arriving. The Ironwood fighters? Sera asked. Too early, Tobias replied, moving to the window. And those are human vehicles. The radio console crackled to life with Grayson's voice. Alpha, we have a problem. Human military convoy approaching from the south. 20 vehicles, heavily armed, moving fast. How much time? Kieran demanded. 10 minutes, maybe less. Sera felt her power spike with sudden realization. They're not waiting for dawn. The assault is starting now. All defensive positions, Kieran ordered, his alpha authority cutting through the chaos. Civilians to the safe rooms, fighters to the perimeter. This is what we trained for. But even as the pack house erupted into controlled activity, Sera knew this attack was different from the previous Hunter assault. This was military precision backed by government resources, and the kind of firepower that could level entire city blocks. We're not ready, she said quietly. The Alliance Network, the coordination with other communities, none of it is in place yet. Then we fight with what we have, Kieran replied grimly. And we hope it's enough. No, Sera said, her power beginning to build as inspiration struck. We don't wait for the network to be perfect. We start building it right now, in the middle of battle, with everyone who's willing to risk the connection. Sera, the Silvermoon Coalition is here, she interrupted, looking at Lyanna. The vampire courts have representatives. Morgana can speak for the witch covens. That's enough to begin with. Begin what, exactly? Alexander asked. The Alliance, Sera replied, silver fire beginning to pour from her skin. Right here, right now, in the crucible of combat. If we're going to do this, there's no better time than when everything is on the line. The sound of approaching engines grew louder, and through the windows they could see searchlights cutting through the forest as the human convoy closed in on their position. 5 minutes, Grayson's voice crackled over the radio. Everyone who's willing to join the network, form a circle around me, Sera commanded, her power reaching out to touch every supernatural being in the room. Link hands, open your minds, and trust me to guide us through this. This is insane, Lyanna observed, but she moved to take her position in the forming circle. Most revolutions are, Elena replied, grasping the coalition leader's hand. That's what makes them effective. As the circle formed around her, werewolves, vampires, witches, and others she couldn't immediately identify. Sera felt the weight of their combined power like a living thing. Different magical systems, incompatible energy signatures, centuries of mistrust and territorial disputes. And underneath it all, the shared desire for freedom that had brought them all together. Whatever happens next, she said as the first explosions lit up the forest around them, we face it as one people. united by choice rather than divided by fear. Her power exploded outward, reaching for every supernatural consciousness willing to join the network, just as the human assault reached full intensity. The real war for supernatural independence was about to begin. Chapter 11. The moment Sera's power touched the assembled supernatural minds, the world exploded into sensation beyond anything she'd ever experienced. Through the hastily formed circle, she felt the essence of every being present. Kieran's fierce wolf spirit, Lyanna's crystalline vampire consciousness, Morgana's earthy witch magic, Elena's ancient wisdom, and dozens of others all flowing together like tributaries joining a mighty river. But it wasn't harmonious. The different magical systems clashed and sparked against each other, creating feedback loops that sent pain lancing through Sera's skull as she tried to hold the network together. "It's not working," she gasped, silver fire pouring from her skin in chaotic waves. "The energy signatures are too different." The first artillery shell struck the forest 50 yards from the pack house, the explosion shaking the building's reinforced foundation and shattering every window on the south side. Through the supernatural network, Sera felt every pack member's spike of fear and fury as their home came under attack. "Focus on what we share, not what divides us," Elena commanded, her voice cutting through both the magical chaos and the sound of approaching warfare. "We're all fighting for the same thing, freedom from human persecution." Sera seized on that common thread, using their shared purpose as an anchor to stabilize the wildly fluctuating energies flowing through the circle. Gradually, the different magical systems began to find harmony rather than conflict, like instruments in an orchestra learning to play the same symphony. "That's it," Morgana breathed, her witch senses monitoring the flow of power. "The network is stabilizing. I can feel connections extending beyond this room. Other supernatural communities are joining the link." Through the expanding network, Sera could sense supernatural beings across the continent responding to the call. Werewolf packs in Canada, vampire courts in Louisiana, witch covens in New England, all adding their strength to the growing alliance. The sensation was intoxicating. Power beyond imagining, consciousness stretched across impossible distances, the ability to touch every supernatural mind in North America. But it was also overwhelming. The sheer volume of information and emotion flowing through the network threatened to drown her individual identity in the collective consciousness of thousands of supernatural beings. "Sera," Kieran's voice cut through the psychic maelstrom, their mate bond blazing like a lighthouse in the storm of alien minds. "Stay with me. Don't lose yourself in the network." She focused on his presence, using their connection as an anchor while she learned to navigate the vast web of consciousness she'd created. Through the network, she could feel the approaching human assault with perfect clarity. Soldiers advancing through the forest, aircraft circling overhead, artillery positions being established on the ridgelines surrounding Nightshade territory. 200 ground troops, she reported, her voice strange and multi-layered as other consciousnesses spoke through her. 6 attack helicopters for artillery batteries. They're trying to surround us completely. Standard siege tactics. Grayson's voice came through the radio. Pin us down while they bring up heavy weapons for the final assault. Another explosion, closer this time, sent debris raining down from the ceiling. The human forces were being methodical, professional, devastating in their precision. Without supernatural intervention, the pack house would be rubble within the hour. "Time to show them what they're really fighting," Sera said, her power reaching out through the network toward the attacking forces. But this time, instead of the gentle empathic touch she'd used before, she channeled the combined will of every supernatural being in the Alliance. Through electronic communication systems, satellite networks, and the omnipresent wireless signals that connected human technology, her consciousness flooded into every device the military forces carried. In helmet-mounted displays, smartphone screens, and radio communications, human soldiers suddenly found themselves experiencing the memories and emotions of the supernatural beings they were attacking. A young private saw through Elena's eyes as she watched her pack flee Nazi persecution decades ago. A helicopter pilot felt Kieran's desperate love for his territory and the families it sheltered. An artillery commander experienced Sera's own confusion and terror as her powers first awakened. "Targets are not responding to engagement orders," came a confused voice over the military radio frequencies. "Multiple units reporting. Equipment malfunctions? Sir, something's wrong with our people." But Sera was just getting started. Through the network, she could feel other supernatural communities under attack across the continent. Government forces had launched simultaneous strikes against every major supernatural population center, hoping to decapitate the independence movement before it could organize effective resistance. "They're hitting everyone at once," she told the circle, her consciousness splitting across impossible distances. "Detroit, Seattle, Denver, Atlanta, everywhere we have established communities." "Then we hit back everywhere at once," Alexander said, his vampire nature adding cold calculation to the network's growing fury. "Show them that attacking one of us means fighting all of us." Sera's power exploded outward through the Alliance network, touching every electronic system within 1,000 miles. Military command centers found their secure communications flooded with the voices of the supernatural beings they'd ordered destroyed. Drone operators experienced the perspective of werewolf cubs cowering in underground shelters. Intelligence analysts felt the grief of vampire elders watching centuries of careful civilization building crumble under government assault. "This is impossible," came a shaken voice over the radio. "The targets are somehow interfacing directly with our communication systems." All units switched to hardened channels N. The transmission cut off as Sera's consciousness found the military satellite network and began rewriting communication protocols in real time. Within minutes, every electronic device within the human command structure was under supernatural control. "Attention all human military forces," Sera's voice echoed from every speaker, every radio, every communication device across the continent. "You are attacking families. You are destroying communities. You are committing genocide against sentient beings whose only crime is existing." Through the network, she showed them everything. The werewolf mother trying to shield her cubs from artillery fire. The vampire elder sacrificing himself to buy time for younger members of his court to escape. The witch grandmother using her last magical strength to ward a school where human and supernatural children learned together in secret. "We are not your enemies," Sera continued, her power flowing through fiber optic cables and satellite links to touch every connected device in North America. "We are your neighbors, your doctors, your teachers, your protectors. We have lived among you for centuries, helping more than harming, building rather than destroying." In military command centers across the continent, hardened officers found themselves weeping as they experienced the reality of what their orders were accomplishing. Soldiers laid down their weapons, rather than continue firing on beings they could now understand were defending their families, just as any human would. But not all of them. Psychological warfare, came a cold voice through the communication chaos. General Patterson from the warehouse meeting, his transmission routed through old-fashioned landline systems that Sera's power couldn't easily penetrate. "The targets are using advanced mind control techniques. All units, ignore emotional manipulation and continue the mission." "Sir, we can see," a field commander began. "You can see what they want you to see," Patterson interrupted. "Supernatural entities are master manipulators. Everything you're experiencing is a lie designed to make you hesitate. Continue the assault." Sera felt the network's collective rage as Patterson's words spread through the human communication systems. Here was someone who had felt the truth of supernatural experience and chosen to dismiss it as deception rather than acknowledge the humanity of his targets. "Some humans will never accept us," she said sadly, her consciousness still distributed across the Continental Alliance. "No matter what we show them, they'll always see us as threats to be eliminated. Then we eliminate them first." Alexander's mental voice carried the cold fury of centuries of vampire persecution. "No," Sera said firmly, even as another artillery barrage shook the pack house around them. "We don't become the monsters they think we are. We defend ourselves, but we don't become killers." "Noble sentiment," Lyanna observed through the network. "But idealism won't stop those artillery shells." As if to emphasize her point, a direct hit struck the pack house's north wing, collapsing part of the structure and sending a shockwave through the building that knocked half the supernatural circle to their knees. "Kieran," Sera gasped as she felt her mate's spike of pain through their bond. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but his golden eyes remained focused on her with absolute trust. "I'm fine," he said. "Keep the network stable. We're running out of time." Through the Alliance consciousness, Sera could feel the mounting casualties as supernatural communities across the continent came under increasingly heavy assault. The empathic revelations had caused some human units to withdraw, but the most fanatical forces were pressing their attacks harder than ever. We need to end this quickly, she realized. Before they kill everyone we're trying to protect. How? Morgana asked, her magical senses monitoring the complex flows of power through the network. We've shown them the truth, but those who refuse to see it aren't going to be convinced by more empathy. Then we don't convince them, Sera said, her understanding crystallizing as her power reached new heights. We make the choice for them. What do you mean? I mean, we use the network to shut down every weapon, every vehicle, every electronic system supporting the assault, Sera replied. Not just interfere with their communications. Actually disable the technology they're using to kill us. That level of technological manipulation would require incredible precision, Alexander warned. Disable the wrong systems and you could crash airliners, shut down hospitals, collapse the power grid for half the continent. Then I'd better be very careful about which systems I target, Sera said grimly. She reached out through the Alliance network, her consciousness expanding beyond anything she'd thought possible. Through satellite networks and fiber optic cables, she could feel the pulse of electronic civilization. Traffic control systems, medical devices, banking networks, the vast interconnected web of technology that modern society depended on. And within that web, she could identify every piece of equipment being used in the assault on supernatural communities. Military radios, targeting systems, weapons platforms, vehicle engines. All of it connected, all of it vulnerable to the right kind of intervention. This is going to hurt, she warned the network. We're with you, came the collective response from thousands of supernatural minds. Whatever it takes. Sera's power exploded outward with the force of a supernatural nova, channeled through the Alliance network and focused with surgical precision on the electronic systems supporting the assault. Across the continent, military equipment simply stopped working. Vehicle engines died, weapons refused to fire, communication systems went silent. The artillery barrage outside the pack house ceased abruptly as the gun's electronic firing systems shut down. Helicopter engines failed in mid-flight, forcing emergency landings in forest clearings. Soldiers found their radios dead, their GPS units blank, their night vision equipment as useless as regular glasses in the darkness. All units report status. General Patterson's voice crackled over the few hardened communication systems still functioning. The responses came back in a chorus of confusion and disbelief. Total equipment failure, sir. Everything electronic just died. It's like someone pulled the plug on the entire operation. Through the network, Sera could feel the wave of relief from supernatural communities as the immediate threat dissolved. But she could also feel the enormous cost of what she'd just accomplished. Her consciousness stretched beyond all safe limits, her individual identity beginning to fragment under the strain of maintaining the Continental Alliance. Sera. Kieran's voice seemed to come from very far away, though she knew he was standing right beside her. You need to release the network. You're burning yourself out. Not yet, she whispered, her voice strange and multi-layered as thousands of other consciousnesses spoke through her. We need to show them. One more thing. Sera, no. Elena's mental voice carried generations of wisdom and warning. You've done enough. Any more, and you'll lose yourself completely in the network. But Sera could feel the human military forces regrouping, falling back on non-electronic weapons and manual communication systems. The respite she'd bought was temporary. Within hours, they'd adapt and resume the assault with crude but effective low-tech alternatives. They need to understand, she said, her consciousness beginning to merge completely with the Alliance network. All of them. Every human on the continent. They need to feel what we feel, know what we know, understand that we're not enemies. Sera. Kieran's desperate mental shout cut through the psychic storm as he felt their mate bond beginning to dissolve. Come back to me. Don't lose yourself in there. But it was too late. Her consciousness had expanded beyond individual identity, becoming a conduit for the collective will of every supernatural being in North America. Through her, their combined power reached out toward the hundreds of millions of human minds across the continent, preparing to share the truth of supernatural existence with every person simultaneously. It would either create the greatest moment of understanding in human history, or destroy her mind in the attempt. Chapter 12. The moment Sera's consciousness touched the collective human population of North America, the world changed forever. In cities and towns across the continent, Nearly 400 million people suddenly stopped what they were doing as their minds filled with visions they had never imagined. A businessman in Manhattan experienced the joy of a werewolf pack's successful hunt. A teacher in Kansas felt the ancient grief of a vampire who had watched civilizations rise and fall. A child in Vancouver glimpsed the earthy wisdom of a witch grandmother tending her herb garden with centuries of accumulated knowledge. But most powerfully, they felt Sera herself. Her confusion at awakening to powers she'd never asked for. Her terror at being hunted by those who should have been protectors. Her desperate hope that humans and supernatural beings could find a way to coexist peacefully. Through the alliance network that was slowly consuming her individual identity, Sera shared everything. The hidden history of supernatural persecution, the careful balance that had been maintained between species for generations, the love and loyalty and simple desire for peaceful existence that motivated the vast majority of supernatural beings. "My name is Sera Blackthorne." Her voice echoed in every human mind simultaneously, carried by Moonfire power channeled through thousands of supernatural consciousnesses. 3 weeks ago, I was a librarian who thought magic was just stories in old books. Today, I'm the last heir of an ancient bloodline, fighting for the right of my people to exist without fear. In the ruined pack house, Kieran watched in anguish as silver fire poured from Sera's body with such intensity that she seemed more light than flesh. Through their mate bond, he could feel her slipping away, her individual consciousness dissolving into the vast network she'd created. "We're losing her," he said desperately to the circle of supernatural beings still linked to the Alliance. "The network is too large, the power flow too intense. She can't maintain this level of connection without becoming something else entirely," Elena finished grimly. "I've seen this before in the old stories. A Blackthorne who tried to bridge the gap between species by merging her consciousness with every supernatural mind in Europe. She succeeded in stopping a war, but afterward, she was no longer individual enough to be called human. More of a living embodiment of collective supernatural will than a person. Through the continental network, Sera continued her revelation to humanity, showing them the truth of what the government had been trying to accomplish. The registration systems that would have led to persecution. The hunting operations designed to eliminate entire communities. The fear and ignorance that had driven humans to attempt genocide against beings who had lived peacefully among them for centuries. "You've been lied to," her voice continued in every human mind. "Told that we're monsters, threats, creatures without souls or conscience. But we're people just like you. We have families we love, communities we protect, dreams for the future that include living peacefully alongside humanity." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the continent, humans began putting down weapons, walking away from military positions, refusing orders to continue the assault on supernatural communities. But more than that, they began actively defending supernatural beings from the minority of humans who still saw them as threats. In the ruins of Detroit's supernatural quarter, human civilians formed protective barriers around wounded werewolves. In Seattle, human doctors began treating injured vampires alongside human casualties. In Chicago, human teachers shielded supernatural children from government agents trying to enforce custody orders. "It's working," Alexander breathed, his vampire senses monitoring the shift in human behavior across his territory. "The revelations are changing everything. Humans are choosing cooperation over conflict. But at what cost?" Kieran demanded, watching Sera's physical form becoming increasingly translucent as her consciousness dispersed through the network. "She's disappearing. The power flow is burning her away from the inside." Through their mate bond, he could feel fragments of her identity scattered across thousands of supernatural minds. Part of her consciousness was experiencing pack life with werewolves in Canada. Another fragment was learning vampire court politics in New Orleans. Her memories and personality were being distributed through the Alliance network, losing cohesion as individual identity became collective experience. "Sera," he called out through their bond, pouring every ounce of his love and desperation into the connection. "Come back to me. You've done enough. The humans understand now. You can let go of the network." Her response came from everywhere and nowhere, her voice layered with thousands of others. "Can't stop. Not yet. They need to see all of it." Through the Alliance, she was showing humanity the full scope of supernatural existence. Ancient vampire courts that had influenced human politics for the better. werewolf packs that had served as protectors of wilderness areas, witch covens that had quietly healed the sick and protected the innocent throughout human history. But she was also showing them the cost of the current conflict. Supernatural children orphaned by government raids. Ancient communities destroyed by modern weapons. Centuries of accumulated knowledge and culture being erased by fear and misunderstanding. The choice is yours, her distributed consciousness told humanity. You can continue this war until both our species are destroyed, or you can choose to build something better together. We've tried hiding from you, tried living in shadows, tried protecting you from the truth of what shares your world. It hasn't worked. Fear and ignorance always find a way to turn neighbors into enemies. In government facilities across the continent, military commanders found themselves unable to continue operations as their soldiers refused orders, and their equipment remained mysteriously disabled. General Patterson's voice, one of the few still advocating for supernatural elimination, became increasingly isolated as even his most loyal subordinates began questioning the morality of their mission. Stand down all operations, came a new voice through the military communication systems. President herself, speaking from an emergency session in Washington. I'm ordering an immediate ceasefire and the establishment of a joint human-supernatural committee to negotiate terms for peaceful coexistence. Ma'am, with respect, Patterson's voice crackled back. These creatures have demonstrated the ability to manipulate human thoughts and disable our technology at will. They represent an existential threat to human sovereignty. They represent an opportunity for humanity to evolve beyond fear and prejudice. The president replied firmly. The revelations have shown us that supernatural beings have been our neighbors, protectors, and allies for generations without our knowledge. It's time we acknowledge that officially. Through the Alliance Network, Sera felt the tide of human opinion shifting decisively toward acceptance and cooperation. The empathic revelations had accomplished what centuries of hiding and generations of careful balance had failed to achieve: genuine understanding between species. But the effort had cost her everything. Kieran, her voice whispered through their mate bond, so faint he could barely detect it through the supernatural static. I love you, remember that, when I'm gone. No. He lunged forward, breaking the circle and grasping her increasingly translucent form in his arms. You're not gone. You're right here with me. But even as he held her, he could feel her individual consciousness fragmenting further. The Sera he loved was being absorbed into the collective supernatural she'd created, her personality and memories becoming shared resources rather than individual identity. She's dissolving into the network, Morgana said with clinical precision. The alliance is too large, too complex for one consciousness to coordinate. It's consuming her to maintain itself. Then we shut it down, Kieran snarled. Break the connections, disperse the network, get her back. If we break the network now while it's still coordinating the continental ceasefire, the resulting chaos could reignite the conflict, Elena warned. Thousands of supernatural beings could die. I don't care about thousands of supernatural beings, Kieran roared, his alpha dominance flaring with desperate fury. I care about her. But she cares about them, Alexander observed quietly, which is why she won't let go voluntarily. She knows that releasing the network could mean renewed warfare. Through their bond, Kieran could feel the truth of that observation. Even as her individual identity dissolved, Sera's core purpose remained intact. Protecting the supernatural beings who had trusted her leadership, ensuring that the peace she'd bought with her sacrifice would endure. There has to be another way, he said desperately. Some method of stabilizing the network without destroying her individuality. There is, came a new voice from the pack house entrance. Everyone turned as Dr. Victoria Blackthorne stepped through the ruined doorway, her military escort conspicuously absent. The stern government official looked haggard, her professional composure cracked by whatever she'd experienced during Sera's continental revelation. You, Kieran snarled. This is your fault. Your ultimatum, your registration schemes. My failure to understand what my grandniece was truly capable of, Victoria interrupted. The empathic revelations. I felt everything. The truth of supernatural existence, the history we've tried to suppress, the genuine desire for peaceful coexistence that motivates most of your people. And, Alexander's voice carried dangerous skepticism. And I realize that everything I've worked toward for the past 40 years has been based on fear rather than facts, Victoria admitted. The Blackthorne bloodline was never meant to be controlled or contained. We were meant to be bridges between species, conduits for understanding rather than weapons for domination. She approached the circle where Sera's increasingly ethereal form floated in Kieran's arms, her scientific instruments detecting energy patterns that defied conventional physics. The network she's created is unprecedented, Victoria continued. A true merger of human technology and supernatural consciousness, spanning an entire continent. But she's trying to coordinate it all herself, using her individual will to maintain connections between thousands of incompatible magical systems. We know that, Kieran said impatiently. Tell us something useful. The solution isn't to break the network, Victoria replied. It's to distribute the coordination burden across multiple focal points instead of concentrating it all in one person. Meaning what exactly? Meaning you, Mr. Nightshade. Your mate bond with Sera makes you the ideal secondary coordinator for the Alliance. Take on part of the burden, share the load of maintaining the network, and she might retain enough individual identity to survive the process. Kieran felt his heart stop. Share the burden how? By allowing the network to flow through you as well, becoming a joint focal point for supernatural consciousness, linked to Sera but maintaining your own identity as an anchor point for hers. The risk, Elena began. The risk is that both of them could be consumed by the network instead of just her, Victoria finished bluntly. But it's the only chance of saving either of them. Through their mate bond, Kieran could feel Sera's response to the proposal. Relief mixed with terror, hope shadowed by the knowledge that she might be condemning him to share her fate. Don't, her fragmented consciousness whispered through their connection. Don't risk yourself for me. Too late, Kieran replied, his decision already made. We're mates, remember? Partners. We face everything together. He opened his mind fully to the Alliance network, allowing his consciousness to merge with the continental web of supernatural awareness. The sensation was overwhelming. Thousands of minds, dozens of different magical systems, the vast complexity of coordinating supernatural consciousness across impossible distances. But unlike Sera, he wasn't trying to control it all himself. Instead, he reached for her fragmenting identity through their mate bond, offering his strength as an anchor while she maintained the delicate balance of the network. Better, she whispered, her form becoming slightly more solid as the coordination burden shifted partially to him. I can think again. Don't think, Kieran advised, his own consciousness stretching across the continent. Just feel. Let the network flow through us instead of trying to direct every connection. Together, they found a new balance. Sera's empathic abilities guided the emotional connections between human and supernatural minds, while Kieran's alpha instincts coordinated the complex hierarchy of supernatural communities. The network stopped being a burden to be carried and became a partnership to be shared. It's stabilizing, Morgana reported with wonder. The Alliance is maintaining itself without consuming either focal point. They've created something entirely new, a permanent bridge between human and supernatural consciousness. Through the stabilized network, Sera and Kieran could feel the transformation spreading across the continent. Humans and supernatural beings were beginning to communicate directly, mind to mind, sharing experiences and perspectives that made fear and prejudice impossible to maintain. This is what integration was always meant to be, Sera realized, her individual identity restored, but still connected to the vast web of consciousness they'd created. Not humans controlling supernatural beings, but true cooperation between species. The network will need maintenance, Victoria observed, her scientific instruments tracking the complex energy flows. Regular coordination between focal points to prevent degradation of the connections. We can handle that, Kieran said, his arm tightening around Sera as their combined consciousness settled into its new configuration. As long as we're together. Always, Sera agreed, her power finally stable and controlled within the framework of their shared bond. Whatever comes next, we face it as one. Through the Alliance network, they could feel the dawn of a new age beginning. Human and supernatural communities working together, sharing knowledge and resources, building a civilization that honored both technological innovation and magical wisdom. It wouldn't be easy. There would still be fear, still be prejudice, still be those on both sides who preferred conflict to cooperation. But for the first time in history, there was also genuine understanding between species, and the infrastructure to maintain that understanding across generations. As sunrise painted the sky over the wounded but healing pack house, Sera Blackthorne knew that her quiet life as a small-town librarian was truly over. But what had taken its place was something far more extraordinary than any prophecy had ever imagined. She was no longer just the last heir of the Moonfire bloodline. She was the first citizen of a new world where humans and supernatural beings could finally live together as equals. And with Kieran at her side and the Alliance network connecting them to thousands of friends and allies across the continent, that world felt not just possible, but inevitable. 6 months later, the Blackthorne Nightshade Institute for Supernatural Studies occupied a sprawling campus in the mountains of Montana, built where the old pack house had once stood. Students, both human and supernatural, attended classes on everything from advanced magical theory to human supernatural conflict resolution. The library that anchored the central building contained the largest collection of supernatural knowledge in the Western Hemisphere, with Sera serving as head librarian when she wasn't coordinating Alliance network maintenance. The integration process is proceeding faster than anyone projected, she told the assembled board of directors, a mix of human government officials, supernatural community leaders, and independent scholars who had emerged as bridges between species. We have over 200 cities now participating in the cooperative governance pilot programs. Any major conflicts? Asked Dr. Morrison, the former military colonel who now served as the human government's liaison to supernatural communities. Nothing that couldn't be resolved through the network, Kieran replied from his position beside Sera. When humans and supernatural beings can literally share each other's perspectives, most conflicts dissolve before they escalate to violence. The economic integration is particularly promising, added Lyanna Silvermoon, whose coalition now operated openly as a supernatural business consortium. Vampire longevity combined with human innovation is revolutionizing everything from medicine to space exploration. And the resistance movements? Dr. Victoria Blackthorne asked. Despite her initial opposition, she had become one of the strongest advocates for integration within the human government. Shrinking, Alexander reported. Difficult to maintain anti-supernatural prejudice when every major city has successful human supernatural neighborhoods. Hard to call us monsters when your vampire neighbor is coaching your child's soccer team. Sera smiled, feeling the vast contentment that flowed through the Alliance network. It wasn't perfect. No major social change ever was. But it was working. Humans and supernatural beings were learning to live together, building a civilization that was stronger for its diversity. Any other business? She asked the assembled board. Just one item, Elena said with a mischievous smile that made Sera's stomach flutter with recognition. The matter of the upcoming bonding ceremony. Sera felt her cheeks warm as attention focused on her and Kieran. That's personal business, not institute business. When the ceremony will be attended by representatives from every major supernatural community and half the world's governments, it becomes diplomatic business, Victoria observed dryly. The symbolism of the first official human supernatural royal wedding is significant for integration efforts. Royal, Sera squeaked. You're the last Blackthorne heir, and he's the alpha king of the Northern Territories, Alexander pointed out with vampire amusement. By any reasonable definition, that makes you supernatural royalty. I just wanted a simple ceremony, Sera muttered. Simple and small aren't the same thing, Kieran said, taking her hand and sending warmth through their mate bond. We can keep the ceremony itself simple while acknowledging its significance for both our communities. Besides, Elena added with grandmother-sharp satisfaction, I've already ordered the flowers. The meeting dissolved into laughter and detailed planning as the assembled leaders began organizing what would undoubtedly become the most complicated wedding in supernatural history. But as Sera listened to their enthusiastic discussions, she felt only deep contentment. 3 months from now, she would marry her fated mate in a ceremony that celebrated not just their love, but the new world they'd helped create together. A world where werewolf alphas could love Blackthorne heirs without fear. Where humans and supernatural beings worked side by side. Where ancient bloodlines could finally stop hiding and start building. It was, she reflected as Kieran's fingers intertwined with hers, and their shared consciousness touched the vast network of allies across the continent. Exactly the kind of happily ever after that a former librarian could appreciate. Complex, challenging, full of unexpected plot twists, and absolutely worth every page of the journey. The end.